Okay, it is 6:30 on Wednesday, May 12th. This is a regularly scheduled select board meeting. Welcome. As chair of the Norwich Select Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Scott as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Addendum 6 to Executive Order 0120 and Act 92, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. In accordance with Act 92, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the temporary amendments to the open meeting law, I can confirm that we have provided public access to the meeting via Zoom with additional access available through the telephone. And that we will be using Zoom for this remote meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if desired, participate in this meeting by raising your hand on the Zoom platform at the bottom of your screen, or else pressing *9 via phone, and then when recognized, unmuting with *6. We have provided public a notice of instructions and also a number if there's any difficulty in accessing the meeting. If there's not a universal agreement, we will do roll call votes. Okay, I think that is it. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, and I have some changes from the very beginning. So go ahead.
Do we need to delay the fit up of the truck?
We do.
Okay.
Yes, and then so that is sort of struck from our agenda, and then the other item that I just wanted to amend for the record was for the policing plan, number 9. The discussion of policing plan and community discussions during first 6 months of interim chief. The action item on the agenda item is fine, but the action was town manager and chair to offer presentation during meeting. I'm going to instead actually have that as a discussion. I think that's more appropriate, a board discussion. So that's just for the record at the start of our meeting. So I will take a motion that excludes the fit up. Go ahead, Claudette.
Sorry, can I ask a question first? Why the fit up cost is coming off the agenda?
They hadn't finished the bid process. The Department of Public Works wasn't prepared to make a bid recommendation. Is that right, Herb?
Yep. Yeah, when we got into one of the bids, it was different than what was required. So the apparent, where'd you go? The apparent, the apparent low bidder is not. So Larry just needs to prepare the updated information in order to make sure you have accurate information to act on.
Okay. So I move to approve the agenda as amended.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. All in favor? Please raise your hand. Great, thank you. The next item on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. Stuart Richards, I see your hand up. So name and locatable address.
Stuart Richards, 82 Elm Street. I was hoping that you would consider, and maybe it's too late for that, I was hoping that you would consider moving the discussion and/or action on the police up in the agenda so that there'd be a time certain that was early in the agenda, rather than having those who are interested in the police discussion wait until I don't know when. So thanks for considering what I'm saying.
It's at 8 p.m. and I can tell you that I will be disciplined, that if we're straying in our agenda, I will request that the board table some or reorder the agenda to make sure that we are there as advertised. I can say that.
8 p.m.
Yes, I believe that is what is on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other public comment for items not on the agenda?
It says 7:55.
Go ahead. We can move into select board comment. Go ahead, Marcia.
I was just going to say number 9 is 7:55.
Oh, okay. So
be that precise.
Thank you, yeah. Marcia. I think I went in my second version where I was trying to save minutes. I must have moved it up by 5. Okay. Any other public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay, any select board comments? Okay. Let's move on to the town manager report. And so Herb, can you update us on some significant happenings? And I know Bree
Wait,
wants it.
what
Oh,
happened?
oh, the
Consent.
consent agenda. Go ahead. The next is the consent agenda. Thank you, Claudette. So when we take, so with the consent agenda, if we move, when we move it, we are authorizing the AP warrants, we are accepting the minutes, and then if there are corrections, the minutes become, the corrections become part of these minutes, and then we also receive correspondence. So anything else, would anyone like to pull any of these items, or can we take a motion for the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I
Is there-
second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Now we have the town manager's report, is that right? Okay, Herb, can you just tell us some significant items that you've listed? And then I know Bree will join us for some questions.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
maybe, go ahead.
No, just Bree's on her way. They're doing the kid trade-off with parents, so she's going to be momentarily here. If you hear some beeping going on in the background, I'm sorry. They're doing the testing of the each fire department and what and their weekly tests. So that's any beeping that you hear. Basically, just in terms of highlights, we have filled the DPW equipment operator position. Matt Williams has filled that. He has a huge amount of experience. He actually was the road foreman in line for like 23 years. And this is, he sort of wanted to get out of the top level and really wanted to just be a normal equipment highway operator. So we're pretty fortunate to have him. So that's a really nice fill from our standpoint. With the finance office, the 6th advertising did go out. There is an individual that I've for lack of a better term, interviewed under Robert Half, which would be kind of a continuation of what Seth did. This person would be able to work in the office, not remotely like Seth was. So that to me is actually a big improvement. And I have to coordinate with Lauren at Robert Half Associates to see if what's going to be the contract arrangement for that. I'm not prepared to say that I'm bringing that person totally on board yet, just because of contract and budget and all that. But if I do bring him on board, he may be an individual that, like Becky, could be a person that could be cross-trained in the process, and fingers crossed, maybe could become finance director type stuff. So he has a pretty good background. Right now, there isn't government stuff there, but he has a lot of background in terms of finance, accounting, that sort of thing. With regard to police, we're obviously, you generally know where we're at. We're going to have more discussion on that. Just wanted to let you know that with regard to the interim police chief discussions with the union, the couple folks that the union rep and our attorney haven't been able to get together, but we're talking tomorrow. So hopefully we can have that wrapped up in a short time. And then I'm also going to add a discussion about temporary filling to avoid potential unfair labor practice. So we'll see what may or may not be able to come out of that. Bree is going to give you an update on the recreation. Oh, the IT management services, the RFPs came in last Friday. Sorry, we had about 40 RFPs that were requested, and we got 10 proposals in. I think I haven't had a chance to really absorb them yet. I do know there are a couple of them that will probably get tossed out because they didn't reply in full to to the RFP scope of work requested. But I think that the other ones certainly have made an attempt at it, and I'm going to be putting together a group of people to evaluate those proposals. Rob, you should know if you haven't gotten a phone call, you're getting one shortly, because you have no choice. You're gonna sit on that team for reviewing the proposals. And I'll probably have Rod, our staffer, who has some of the background, and then I'm trying to find another person that has some technical background. Rob, if you can think of someone that's nearby that would understand this kind of stuff, that's kind of like a Norwich resident or something, I'd be happy to entertain that kind of perspective, just so that I know how to review proposals and stuff, but I just want to make sure I know how to review them with all these technical issues that we're dealing with. So if you have if you have suggestions, please let me know. Still working on the AP procedures, and then I've reached out to the town treasurer to see if she can help out with some of the what I call the accounts receivable, the other side of the coin, because we need to have that balance. Cheryl was out of town for a little bit. She's now back out of town. So she hasn't been able to reply back to me yet, but I'm sure that she has an interest in helping me work on some of those specific proposals. So I think Bree is probably almost there. If you're not there, I heard her walk in the door. But if you have questions in terms of just those highlights or other questions that of anything else that's come up, please let me know.
Yes, I think Bree is still connecting. I saw her pop in and pop out. But do folks have questions for her about some of these updates that we heard? I have one question about the finance director. So we did a 6th round of hiring for sort of the A-line position, but then I hear also that you're working with Robert Half, which was used sort of in an interim capacity. So do you sort of imagine an interim solution for the A-line hire? I just want to check that.
What I'm kind of doing right now is going on a little bit of a dual or a parallel course. So that originally we were going to have Seth through the end of the fiscal year. I'm a little bit nervous that by going to the end of the fiscal year without a Seth person on board, that it just adds misery to the audit process. And then also the reporting process for you folks, as well as me trying to get done some additional procedures and policy amendments. So I've done the 6th time advertising. That's going to take a couple more weeks for any responses to come in. The difference in the advertising for that is advertising it both as either a full-time or a part-time position with no less than 20 hours a week. And then I at least am exploring with Robert Half whether they had someone to fill in again for a short-term basis, more to fill out the balance of the fiscal year. The other thinking is that if they have somebody, which they do right now, they vet that person out. So if there is a person that can come on board who can be in the office, who this person can, and he can take up some of the slack and start running with it, that might be a potential of a candidate, then I've got someone that, and the person is interested in becoming the full-time person, this is an opportunity to see that person perform without a formal commitment, if you will, other than a short-term contract with Robert Half.
Okay.
I'm just trying to explore different, as you know, we're trying to fill this position, and I'm trying to find alternative and outside the box sort of thinking of how we can get this position filled, so we can start getting some burden off of the town.
Right. Okay. Any other questions for her? Go ahead, Marcia.
Just, I don't know who Robert Half is.
Oh, sorry, it's a temp agency that specializes in folks that have like accounting, financial backgrounds. Sorry.
Thank you.
Becky downstairs was hired through that organization. It was actually account temps, but the Robert Half is sort of the executive level of account temps.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay, so should we turn to Bree? So Herb thought that it would be a good idea to maybe sort of have some, I guess, guest stars in some of his time manager reports, some department heads. And so for efficiency, I asked folks to sort of send some questions for her, for Bree. And so she'll answer those questions, and then anything that we don't get to, we can follow up and put in a subsequent packet. So, so yeah, go ahead, Bree. Do you want me to ask the question, or do you want to ask the question and then give the statement?
Sorry, I was just about to ask you that, how you wanted to handle that. That's up to you.
Sure. I'll ask. How about I'll ask the question? So it's,
Okay.
So it's maybe more interactive for the folks at home. Okay. So one of the questions was, what are some of the needs of the Recreation Department from the Department of Public Works, and how do the departments work together, for example, with Huntley Meadow?
So the Department of Public Works is really kind of integral to Norwich Recreation. So they not only keep our lots cleaned and clear and make sure that they're safe, we actually follow a spring and a fall schedule with them. And spring includes them putting up the tennis nets, making sure all the playgrounds are safe, checking the levels of mulch, starting with the field plans, which we have to change the layouts of the field plans every season in order to rotate through the fields. So then we have to go out and measure the fields, and DPW handles that. They distribute all of the picnic tables at the pavilions. This year they're installing grills down at Ballard Park, and we're increasing usage at Barrett Playground. So they're down there quite a bit as well. Then throughout the year, they do the mowing. They line the fields. That's weekly for both of those. They do most of their normal upkeep down there, but then they also have been working over at the school to help with the landscaping over there. And then in the fall, that actually happens through the spring and the summer. And then in the fall, we have the closing of Huntley. And the closing of Huntley is setting up the stairs, taking all of the benches from all of the parks throughout Norwich, putting them under the pavilion, also moving the groomer to the pavilion. Shutting down Huntley also includes taking down the nets, the tennis nets, making sure that we aerate and overseed the fields so that they can go to bed for the year, and closing down the stairs so that those are also safe. This year we've started putting up orange fencing as well. Not just the huge orange fencing that you see everywhere, but also the orange fencing on the stairs, just as a safety precaution, because kids tend to use that sledding hill quite a bit. Then after they close Huntley, they set up the ice rink, which is fantastic and super important. And they also close it down, and the ice rink is maintained throughout the winter by volunteers, but setting it up really does kind of take the DPW to help with that. And then during the winter, they make sure that Tracy Hall is ready for all of our indoor programming, which is expanded quite a bit. We now have pickleball indoors, obviously not during the pandemic, but in a normal year, we would have indoor pickleball, we would have basketball in here, and futsal, which is really fast soccer, and yoga and kung fu and fencing. So they take care to make sure that Huntley is ready during the outdoor season, and Tracy Hall is ready in the indoor season.
Okay. And have you found that your use of reliance on the Department of Public Works has increased over the years, or not significantly?
Well, so this is my second year, so I don't know if I'm really the one to say if there's been a huge increase there. I do rely on them quite a bit because this is a one-person department, and I can't drive a 60-inch mower. I can't drive a truck legally, and I really am not that great at field layouts, and grass maintenance is something I'm still learning, which most rec departments, from what I understand, use their DPW, or they hire out contractors, or they have an employee for them.
Okay, great. The second question was, How many years worth of use can we expect from the tennis courts in their current condition? Can you explain RVS's usage or their recent rental? And then also what RVS is?
Yeah, so our RVC is the River
RVC.
Valley Club.
Okay.
And I did find a lifespan of our tennis courts is going to be about 40 years, and we're at that. And from what I understand, the cracking is extensive. It is getting worse. We can still use it, but it's going to cost us a low estimate of $5,000 a year to patch it every single year. And with the cracks just getting worse, there's a point at which it will become completely unsafe. We're not at that point yet. We are at the point that we are spending more than we are putting away in the designated fund for them. And my explanation for the rental to RBC, not just because it's historic, but they've actually done a great job, especially in this year. They're now offering to teach our tennis camps and provide adult clinics and try to do more outreach to Norwich, which was called for last year by a lot of the public who kind of wanted to know why we were renting that space. Go ahead, Claudette, sorry.
Yeah, just to, I asked that question, and I have no problem with the rental of the courts to RVC. Did I really put RVS?
I think I might have translated it, perhaps not.
My question was, because we had heard in budget season that the courts were so dismal and needed to be completely redone.
Yeah.
And now now we're hearing, well, they can't be that bad because my interpretation is they can't be that bad because River Valley is going to rent them for tennis camp.
So River Valley is using our one functional, like fully functional court. If you go down there, they're on court number 4. It is the best court down there. If you're a pickleball player, you can see the deficits in the courts. And when I did have that meeting before and explained that the tennis courts are really in disrepair, I went to our contractor and I said, what is this going to cost if we can eke out some more life? And that's what I was given. They're going to come down here as soon as we have 5 dry days and they're going to patch it to try to eke us through a little bit. But the low end of that estimate is $5,000, which just seems like an astronomical amount of money to be eking by when our designated fund is $4,500. And so I'm trying to make up some of that by also renting it out, putting camps down there, trying to build up some kind of revenue.
Okay.
Great. Thanks. I think the next question, so I brought in this question out a little bit from how Claudia asked it, but it was, how does your office work with the finance office on a day-to-day basis? And then there was a recent grant that maybe you can tell us about a little bit. And then how do you expect to work with the finance office to set up grants, track its spending and administer it?
Yeah, so right now, we've had, you all know, we've had so much turnover and change in the finance office. So it's been different all the time. Working with the finance office currently is actually great, and setting up a grant, a way to administer that grant, I think is going to be more me working with Becky and creating a flow sheet, which we have both the expenses of the grant as well as the staffing in there, and we can match the expectations of the grant, which the grant that we just applied for was called the Summer for All grant. It is a $20,000 to $75,000 grant for Vermont towns to expand their summer programming and offer programs where they weren't before and expand their outreach, but it has to be something that is not existing currently. So our grant was for $43,000 to offer free, so it's a Bernie Sanders grant. And if you sat in on any of his calls, he really wants free camp and childcare. And I think that's great. And so part of our grant is to offer aftercare so that working families can keep their kids in camp with us at no cost and to provide meals for the kids who are in the camps. The other part of the grant is to expand Barrett Playground so that we have one more space for families to go to during the summer. Huntley is getting really crowded. Barrett Playground is meant as a playground. So the other part of the grant is for adding in natural structures from a company in New Hampshire called Natural Playgrounds with embankment slides and embankment climbing walls, and adding these little forts that go in the ground. So that's what that grant is for. It's not a really high touch grant. It's things we would normally be considering doing already. There was a 2-week turnaround in this grant with that high of a budget expectation, which is, it was great that we had a playground that needed work and that we did not already have a current aftercare plan. So it was an easy one to put forth, but it also comes with an expectation on the back end where they offer an awful lot of support for tracking the grant, which I thought was great, which I would not have applied for this grant without that. So they support you if you get the grant award in how to track your grant, how to submit all of the background that you need, and how to make sure that you're adhering to what the grant expects from you.
And the follow-up to that was, do you see any difficulty in hiring folks to administer the grant? I think we're obviously hearing about labor in other departments, finance, policing. Is rec
So hiring for rec has been actually really great this summer. I have more CIT applicants than I've ever had, but it's really odd because they're all 15. And normally they come in at 13 and they're coming in older. I actually have 2 high schoolers who are working for me right now as coaches. They want to get in early. They're great. I love them with kids. I'm using some of them as umpires and referees as well. These kids are looking for jobs, which I think is a great fit. Hiring for this aftercare program, I don't see it as a huge problem because we're starting at a pot of 12. And we have, in the pandemic, we had a 4-to-1 ratio for the children. Outside during normal sports season, it's an 8-to-1 ratio, and our normal summer camp is a 6-to-1 ratio. So right now I'm looking at hiring 1 instructor. I already have that person. I'm talking to them now about moving around their hours to fit that. 2 counselors and 1 CIT. The CITs are unpaid for 2 weeks. So that's kind of a rotating shift. We do have interest already though.
Cool. And then one more question, and then I see some public questions. And that was, can you sort of talk about the rec department and your relationship with in-kind donations, or and how has that been managed recently? Do you have like an example that you would like to share?
So recently, in-kind donations, we've had private donations, and I do know that it's kind of spurred the question of the gift policy, which I highly support that being structured so we all understand exactly where we stand, because I do not believe in the cart being leading the horse. It doesn't make sense to me either. So rec really has benefited from a lot of private donations. When I looked back through the records, I found out that Jill, my predecessor, had $114,000 in private donations just for Huntley. And that was to add the stone steps. That was to add the baseball, well, part of the baseball field. The other part was done by the Eagle Scouts. The Eagle Scouts also built the bridge. The pavilion at Huntley was donated by a builder who then came back 2 years ago to replace the roof. There are just so many. Oh, and also the playground was private donations as well. You can see the plaque right when you go down there, the little hut there, another private donation. So I think private donations in Norwich give people who can't give back in person a way to give back to the community and make an impact without affecting the taxpayers who can't spend that money. And you just can't take another hit just in order to upgrade Huntley Meadows where they might not actually be going. But I do agree that a structured approach to private donations is definitely called for. I don't think my department should be led by the money that's coming in. I think that money should be directed with a plan.
Okay, and there was one other question that sort of asked a lot about your thoughts around capital planning, but I think we could go long for that. So I'm gonna ask that question. But it's 7, so I'll take a question from the public. Linda Cook, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question? *6. Sorry, Linda, you have to push *6 to unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry, you didn't hear what I just said, but I'm going to try again.
Yes.
It's a twofold question. With all the increasing in programming and activities and probably structures, there's a maintenance cost. And what is that future maintenance cost going to be for the town? And number 2, is there a revenue coming in that will defer the cost to pay for maintenance, or will the budget have to increase?
So Linda, right now we haven't planned for any current structures. And in the capital budget planning that Roger just talked about, we are working on the maintenance, the expected maintenance. I do know the lifespan of all of our structures and our equipment and facilities, and how much the replacement cost is on each of them. But you're right. I am still working on what an annual maintenance might actually cost out every year for each one of those. And for the increased programming, we haven't really had any kind of increased cost with that, because there've been outdoor programs. They're things we've always run, and we've just increased the frequency of them, and we use volunteers only. So that's a pretty easy revenue generator. I mean, and we're doing skills and drills, and me bringing people out on trails for foraging. So these are really light touch community engagement right now.
Okay, great. Well, thanks to you, Bree, for.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Claudette. Did you have you want to follow up?
Sorry. Can I just ask one other question?
Sure, go ahead.
Bree, I'm wondering if you have more applicants to these programs, even the expanded programs, than you can accommodate. Do you have a plan on how you will decide who gets in?
So we already have wait lists for all programs right now, and it is first come, first serve. And I do put aside, it's about 20% for each program, because I know there's some need in Norwich, and I go over to the school. I've talked to Katie Cormier. Anytime somebody comes into town or is identified as not particularly being able to demonstrate need, but having some kind of, maybe suddenly something happened in your family and you really need some help, we keep places for families like that, but confidentially.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Claudette. Okay. Thank you, Bree, now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to Bree. And thanks to Herb for the suggestion. I thought that rapid fire was, I think, really helpful and informative. I think board members are nodding. Maybe they agree. Okay, they're nodding. Cool. All right, so then maybe we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, and that is, I'm looking now, follow up from the capital budget work plan and goal setting. So I'll share my screen a little bit. I don't think we have to have sort of a vote to affirm, but I do want to give you a sense of what I heard and sort of what the landscape from last week from our special meeting about capital planning and what I think the landscape is for our meetings. God help us in many ways, because it's very ambitious. So let me just bring that up. Okay. Oops, not the whiteboard. Okay, here we go. Okay. So this is the Trello board that has been referenced before. And so I think there were some items that we had talked about some capital planning goals, and then I've gone on and sort of scheduled them out for discussion and based on our meetings. And I think June 9th is particularly where we get into some conversations. Mary and I agreed, you can see here, that we would develop sort of a set of stakeholder interview questions for department heads about growth opportunities or pain points. And then we're going to also have a conversation about what a capital asset versus what a capital project is, and then possibly look at what a fixed asset policy or a capitalization policy might mean, and sort of understanding how depreciation and some of these ideas factor into what our work needs to be. Then we'll have a common agreement and discussion of life cycle and determining with examples across departments. So I'm putting all that in for June 9th. And then we also have, and then more in the spirit of agenda setting, that is paired with, we'll receive the wastewater study recommendation from the Planning Commission. And we'll also, by June 9th, to finalize our police reform plan and our community outreach. So, but anyway, I wanted to, some of the items that are tagged as capital planning are scheduled as an output of some things that I heard last time. The only other thing I'll say, and then I'll let us look at this, and then I can bring it back in a Word document or a different format for us for the packet, is that we also talked about our committee structure, finding ways to engage more meaningfully with our committees. And so you'll see over the course of the summer, I've scheduled some time, say, with the Conservation Commission to hear that Emerald Ash Borer update and to hear their significant happenings. Same with the Trails Subcommittee. I've heard that they plan to put forth some budget recommendations for some of their trailheads. That's certainly a question we can ask on July 4th. We also, June 23rd is a review, beginning the review of the personnel policies and a draft table of contents sort of style proposal for what a committee workbook might look like. And then the other thing that I'm really not sure about is how we want to sort of hear from department heads. You know, on June 9th, we have sort of doing the educational sort of consensus building. And then in something like June 23rd, I'm wondering if we are ready to sort of hear from some, like say the fire department on some of their capital budgeting items. So I think this is sort of what the landscape is looking. It goes on through the summer. We received the Child Care Committee report on July 28th. And then we have the Article 36 task force on August 11th, including their updated inventory. So, so this is, I don't know if any folks have a high level reflection, if they feel like I've missed something in what they've been able to see, and I can bring it forward next week in a different format as well.
Yes, I have a comment,
Go ahead,
Roger.
Ray. Yeah.
Just that I noticed that you have the fire department on there,
Yeah.
but sort of largest department is DPW.
Yeah.
So where, and where do the other departments fit in if we're trying to kind of have an overview of what we're dealing with for capital and, for giving a go-ahead on a preliminary go-ahead on a capital budget. I'm only seeing one department in there.
Yeah, and so you can see some of the tags, and I think maybe it's the format. So the rec department I've scheduled for July 14th, obviously,
Okay.
and June 23rd is the fire department, only because we've received more recently. I don't want to say we've sort of have their assets that they've presented to us, and we have certain justifications around some of their capital budgeting items that have been recently, I guess, re-upped. We've seen that in our recent correspondence. So that's the reason why they're first. But you'll see,
There's rec. Okay, I'm starting to see it now. So I see Public Works is on August 25th, and General Administration is farther on. And
so I may not have scheduled everything yet, but I think the general spirit, I guess my question around that, Mary, is, do we sort of do we sort of sprinkle sort of the department presentations and hearing from them throughout the summer? Or is there something that needs to happen beforehand other than sort of these, I guess, educational pieces that I have for June 9th?
I just think that maybe having a comprehensive overview, but it looks like we've got planning, police, rec, DPW. So is the only thing missing just general?
Perhaps.
That would be what, finance, the town clerk, the town manager's office.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd have if we could put that in somewhere, I think we'd have almost everything, right? That we would have touched upon those departments, at least before the end of the summer, before we get into budget season. And also, if we're going to approve a capital budget, would we have any kind of scheduling idea about that? Would we want to do that once we feel that we're got a handle on things before we are getting into the operational budget process? Like if we felt ready in October or something like that, would we want to schedule that for then?
Right, and so what I have is the vote of confidence in the draft capital plan by August 25th. So
Right.
I guess
That's as far as we got with that idea, I think.
yes.
Right.
So we would have to go ahead.
But now that we're getting a little closer to that, I think this is a good framework for kind of getting up to that point. But also just in terms of kind of the calendar, would we want to, and I think we might have talked about this, that we have been kind of feeling like we've been getting first submitting the capital budget, not dealing with it, not approving it, but shouldn't that come before we deal with the operational budget? So should that come in, for instance, in October or late September, we'd have a kind of a vote of confidence. But in terms of actually taking up and approving a capital budget, what would the calendar look like for that? It's like and I'd like to hear from others. I'm just wondering how we do this as far as the calendar and trying to get some stuff done.
Go ahead, Marcia, did I see your hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, the sort of theory of keeping the lights on and paying the regular bills, I'd sort of like to know that we've got that in hand first before we do the capital budget. And so it seems like I'd like to know what, the departments are saying, see what we get from Herb in terms of a book of, this book of assets, right? Simple, and we're going to lose this one on this date. We need to replace this one on this date. So I think we need that first. And I didn't see, but we had said that the second meeting in May was when I was going to have some sort of a redraft of the operational plan.
Yes, it's on
Is
there.
that okay?
Yeah. Sorry, I started in June 9th, but on May 26th, Marcia, I want to have a conversation more about sort of the general fund, highway fund, and sort of the statute questions that you raised, and the trying to identify every sort of the legislative intent behind some of the designated funds that were established. And then I'm also maybe using the climate emergency fund that needs a second reading as part of that discussion around designated funds to see what fruit might bear from that, what issues or what ideas.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically, once we have our sort of operational plan firmly in our mind, how we're going to do that, we highlighted those 4 things: Act 36, childcare, policing, and keeping the lights on. Then we assure ourselves we've got the money for that, and then we look at what we need for the future, and then we do the capital budget. That's sort of, in my mind, logical, but
that's sort of how it's Trelloed out. If so yes.
But isn't it a little different in that we sort of try to get a handle on things, try to get a sense of what Marcia's talking about with her operational budget, and then we would have more of a handle on the capital, and then we actually do the budget for next year.
Yes.
So is it really sort of a 3-part thing? Like really do some research, get a handle on all the different parts, make sure we're on the same page, and then a preliminary approval of the capital budget, then actually get into the capital budget, then actually get into the operational. So it seems to me it's a 3-part process. With
It
a
is.
lot of work coming up, actually, to be informed, but I think that will be very rational, very helpful.
The one thing I will say, and then I will turn to Coletta, is there's an expiring bid on a fire truck. And so we will have to talk about that or else inform the fire department of that. That will expire June 1st. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, I think what we, doing everything that has been described in the, say, like the sequence that occurred last budgeting season makes it an impossibility for us to do that work. So we need to get everything earlier than it, it can't be November, end of October. It needs to be significantly earlier, in my opinion.
Are you speaking about an operational or an operating budget?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Marcia.
Claudette, do you mean earlier than the Trello or earlier than last year?
Earlier than last year, and what was the date on the Trello?
I have the second meeting in October is in my mind.
Yeah, and I think that's too late, personally.
Okay. We have a policy that we could look at for these dates, right?
Yep. And is it the second meeting in October?
I believed so, but we can go ahead, Mary.
Should our vote of affirmation in August be more an adoption of a capital budget? And then we try to move our information if possible, if it's possible for the town manager to produce it earlier into October. Because I'm seeing that it's all going to kind of come into a parallel track of capital budget consideration at the same time as our operational budget, and maybe that's okay. But I'm starting to think that just in terms of scheduling, those two trains of thought are going to converge in the fall.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, I think the earlier, August may be pushing it, but I would love for us to be able to affirm a capital budget at September, if we keep in line with the second week in October for the operational plan, if we can affirm the capital by the first week in September or the first meeting in September, I'm not sure if that provides enough opportunity to, hopefully it will. Then you just need to plug numbers into.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful. It might sort of clear out a lot of the, some of the complexity of the operational, if we really understand the capital and what the, the donations to designated funds are and the scale of that. It would at least clear it out. So, and when we said August, we could still aim for August, but kind of have September as a little cushion to get behind, but really try to do it then.
So Herb, can you just tell us very quickly, and then I'll do another sort of round of questions for folks, and then maybe we'll move on. But Herb, what are you telling your department heads now about capital planning in light of what you've been hearing from us about our intention to adopt a vote of confidence in August?
Well, at my last department head meeting, I basically talked about the fact that they needed to, in the realm of the way that this conversation is headed with the select board, they need to basically do the next capital budget and program, which is to add, anticipate the 1 year shift where we've got to now go out one more year, bring that first year into the capital budget year, because by the time you get to, if you look at the current capital budget and program and its configuration, we're about to start fiscal year 22. We don't have an understanding as to what really we're going to move forward with or not. We also did make some adjustments during the operational period when we were cutting back on some stuff. So there are general updates there. But so I basically said, by the time we get into this, they need to be doing the next capital budget and program. So effectively, it's think of a big shift of everything by 1 year, adding in a new year, and then so that it stays as a 6-year plan, and then to start working on that now.
Okay. Any other comments? Go ahead, Mary. And Rob, I want to hear from you if you would like. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, just Herb, in terms of what I was trying to visualize for a schedule, do you think it's possible for us to work with you and the department heads and each other to possibly adopt a capital budget by September? Does that seem like a reasonable schedule?
Well, that would be my aim, is to have, like I've said before, is to have that capital budget and program done and adopted before you get into the operational process. When I get in trying, so I would like to be able to do that because the department heads typically have to get budget stuff to me by the middle of October so that I can get it ready for the board the end of October. And we have gone into the beginning of November the last couple of years just because of the extent of what we're dealing with. So the logic is built into that, Mary. And I would clearly strive to meet the logic of that schedule because that's what I advocate for.
Okay, thank you, Herb.
Okay, any other, it's 7:21, we're getting on 1 minute over. Any other questions? I see Matt Sweat has his hand. I'll go ahead, Matt.
Thanks. I did want to mention, I think you mentioned it too, that we have a bid that will be expiring for a fire truck, I think we get the 1st of June. And, we've been doing lots of due diligence through the past 2 years to like appropriately plan on replacing our engine 2. And if we choose to let this bid expire, when we're looking at between 10 and 20 grand more, even if we were to go with the same, bid. So I was wondering if it's possible to, I didn't look at all your scheduling enough, but to put us on the 26th of May, so we could do sort of our presentation as fire department and also talk about the purchase of of that fire truck.
And so I think the question, for board members is, do you want to authorize a capital purchase without having the full breadth of the discussion that we just talked about, knowing, sort of keeping in mind everything that Matt has said. And I've also asked for additional materials that Alex Northern has provided us in our correspondence. So I will say that. Go ahead, Mary.
I think I would really strongly consider Matt's proposal, because otherwise I think we basically lose a year where we're all trying to get up to speed to understand everything. And I do think that our department heads do put some thought into what they're doing. So I would give that a lot of weight. I would like to see that opportunity to support that bid. So I'll just say that. Also, I think that, for the best, we'd all love the world to have all our ducks in a row, and sometimes the ducks drown, and sometimes extra ducks fly in, and sometimes the ducks swim in circles. I just think that sometimes life is a little chaotic, and you have to make a little bit of room for unexpected things.
I just add that the gestation period for this duck is 18 months. So even when we sign the paper, if you were to approve the purchase, we're still essentially 18 months away from
18 months
receipt
out.
of that fire truck.
Yes.
So that's where, that's where I'm trying to be very, and actually I think that the process that you're talking about doing for capital planning is wonderful, and it is a really hard process to do. I appreciate it, but we're talking about a time frame that's much more extended at this point.
18
Even
months
if we
out,
were to
yeah.
make a decision to purchase it. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to ask Claudette, how do you feel about this idea of discussing a capital budget item without the full breadth of our discussion? I know that you've alerted us when you were chair about this very situation. So how do you feel now?
I'm at this point, I'm quite ambivalent.
Okay.
Of all departments with the capital budget, they were the ones that presented the most detailed and thoughtful piece of information. Having said that, do I agree that we need a new fire truck? That's another whole discussion. So,
Okay. Okay, so maybe we'll take this up in our agenda setting process if folks are willing to bring this forward as an agenda item. Go ahead, Marcia. Do you want to make a point?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Matt, the latest information that we saw indicated that engine 1 needs to be refurbished. So I wanted to know how much you anticipate that will cost, when you anticipate that will be done. And then I just wanted to say, I was convinced when I read the other report that, we don't need old equipment. So if we need a fire engine and the national standards have years, then I think that should be listened to. So, and I also think we need to save $20,000 if we can. So I'd like to see it on the agenda, but I would like an answer to the engine 1 refurbishment.
Okay, go ahead quickly, and then I'll
Sure. And I apologize. I'm being told that Zoom, my connection is unstable. Engine 1, the refurbishment of engine 1 could go hand in hand with the purchase of the new truck. Doing that would extend the life of engine 1 as a backup truck and essentially save us money and create a more staggered replacement schedule much further in the future. So that's why the refurbishment of engine 1 was suggested in addition to the replacement of engine 2. The replacement of engine 2 is the main thing that we were focused on.
Okay, so
did anybody hear that from me?
Yes, we heard it. But just to be clear, that the discussion of the engines is not actually the agenda item we're discussing. My question, I try to intentionally ask the question broadly, which was, can we discuss how do we feel about making sort of an exemption to the process that we've been sort of discussing for at least 3 meetings? And it seems like there is some level of comfort with that. So go ahead, Marcia.
With the caveat that when we discuss it, I want to know how much it's going to cost to refurbish engine 1.
Okay, great.
I will definitely do that.
Go ahead, Claudette, and then I'm going to move on if that's okay.
This is actually a question for Matt, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Matt, was that refurbishment of engine 1 in your material for capital budget that you presented for? I don't have it in front of me.
No, it wasn't in the materials that were submitted in our most recent budget materials. It was something that, like, we're constantly talking about ways that we could move to save money, and that was one thing that came up more recently and has only been in the information that we've shared with you, in the past couple of months.
Okay.
They've got to be some priorities here.
Yes, well, we have a deliberative and intentional capital budgeting discussion, but so yes. Okay, so with thanks, I'm going to move on if that's okay, because we're about 9 minutes over. But thanks I think this was really generative and I'll take this and put it in a different format, and our next meeting we'll hear more from Marcia on some of the operational planning that we've discussed. Okay. Go ahead, Mary.
So if we're going to move on from this, I mean, we have a motion. I don't think not feeling like we really need to do that, but I do feel like general administration should be part of our schedule.
Yeah.
And also some kind of discussion, although I don't know if it's operational. It's probably operational. I was thinking professional services, but that's more operational. You know, it affects everything else, but maybe when we get more to the budget season, we should have or should there be a designated fund for it? Because it seems to be a large chunk.
For what? I'm sorry.
Professional services just
Okay.
seems to be a category, you know, that might need its own designated fund in this town. So just saying.
Okay.
But we'll gain $30,000 because we'll have paid back the Church Street sidewalk engineering money,
Okay,
23.
good thought.
or however many, however.
Okay. So, okay, cool. So I'll move on to a discussion of our purchasing policy, some amendments. And so Marcia and Rob worked on this. Go ahead.
Wasn't
Marcia?
there supposed to be a motion?
I don't necessarily know if we need a motion. It seemed like there's some general consensus, and then I can bring someone.
Okay,
I agreed to bring this forward in a different format for next week. Is that okay?
okay. Yeah, it's just
Or-
I saw it.
Oh, okay.
I saw it on the motion sheet.
I mentioned that as well, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So next is the purchasing amendments to our purchasing policy. I think Marcia and Rob worked on this. And it was I put what I believed was sort of the final work product from you both into the packet. How would you like to discuss this for us, Marcia? Should I bring it on the screen?
Yes, that'd be good. I was trying to look at it as well, so.
Okay. Do you want to get us started while I do that?
Sure. So basically, we kind of kept it simple. In the purpose, we just added to encourage purchases which are ecologically friendly or greener. And then under the procedures, I tried to do sort of a more inclusive thing, so that where possible and appropriate, there should be an attempt to encourage and select green products, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third sentence is this preference for green products and ecologically friendly practices and an awareness of greenhouse gas production and other negative impacts on the earth is incorporated by reference for the whole of the master financial policy and shall apply to all purchases described in this document, including but not limited to paragraphs 4, C, D, and E of the section. On the second page, Rob had pointed out the citation there, and I think it's enough to just put down the statute itself, because this particular website could change, etc. So as long as we cite the statute, I think that's sufficient. On the fourth page, oops, I'm jumping here ahead. Come on the fourth page, that keeps jumping around for me. On J, again, Rob caught this one for construction projects over 2,000, a statement that the contractors will provide a copy of the most current wage determination. And then basically, I said from the US Department of Labor website, and then there's just a citation and evidence of compliance with the Davis-Bacon Act, which I confess I don't know anything about. And then on the next page, paragraph 9P, I just added the negative impacts to the environment by excess production of greenhouse gases consistent with the requirements and procedures, paragraph 1 above. And I think there's one more thing. That's it.
No, that's it.
So essentially, we tried to just sort of incorporate by reference that this was the trajectory that we wanted to go on, and then tidied up some citations. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcia.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia and Rob.
And Rob.
Just a question about, I really like the fact that you've emphasized the green aspects. I'm wondering, does it say in terms of purchasing shall or is encouraged to? For instance, if it says shall and we pass this, does that mean that, for instance, DPW or perhaps the fire department would be sort of mandated? Let's say they have to replace lawn equipment with electric, or I don't know if they even have electric chainsaws or things like that. But would that impact immediately the kind of purchases they have coming up? And I think maybe it's, it's probably good to say shall, but I just wanted to know how that was worded because I can't quite see it on the screen.
Okay, under procedures, paragraph 1, it says where possible and
Okay.
appropriate. And
Where possible and appropriate. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
'Cause I
okay, so at least a little wiggle room. It's not a shall, but it's a strong suggestion.
Yeah, because you're right, shall could lead to some pretty difficult
Drastic.
choices.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts for Marcia and Rob? The only thing I appreciate that this is more, oh, go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to add that what I'd wanted to get in there, and it was modified slightly by Marcia, but is still there, is that we consider secondary and tertiary greenhouse gas mitigation whenever we're looking at bids and quotes.
Could you
What do you
explain
mean
that?
by
a little
that?
more? I'm sorry.
Well, for example, if there are two contractors with similar bids, but one of them has his whole crew coming from southern New Hampshire every day, or southern Vermont or Burlington or something like that, that compared to a local provider contractor whose crew is entirely local, that adds an impact. Or if they in their own let's say, for instance, if they have their own agreement to provide have their business provided with renewable energy, solar or wind or whatever, that is that's a notch higher up on the scale to me than somebody who just does the traditional sort of work.
Claudette.
Yeah, I think, that gets really.
Yeah, it's been minimized in the
Well, I mean, what if
document.
the ones from Southern New Hampshire carpool and the ones from Vershire all come in their own car? What if the ones that come from Southern New Hampshire or Burlington drive electric vehicles? I mean, it really gets to some information that really is, how are you going to put that in a bid package? I think that would lead to some absolutely extremely limiting and much more complex, and probably people who wouldn't bid.
Possibly,
Personally.
but it's an issue that should be dealt with.
Go ahead, Marcia. Did you want to?
I was just going to say, we mildly dealt with that with the second sentence on the procedures paragraph. It says, similarly, Norwich will consider suppliers / businesses which employ such reduction practices and green purchasing policies in the provision of their work. So,
and that's satisfactory as a vague enough position to me.
Go ahead, Mary, and then I actually have a comment. By the way, go ahead, Mary.
I like the wiggle room that's left for the tertiary, secondary and tertiary. And I think it may be that businesses shape themselves to promote sort of their greenness. There may be sort of internal business organization or ratings that come up. as a result of businesses trying to come at this too from this angle. So I think it's just good to mention it and also to leave a little wiggle room.
Right. I guess my comment is that Marcia sort of said that this policy signals more of our intention and our direction on these issues. And I believe that's a good paraphrase. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marcia. So I appreciate that. That being said, I'm totally here for what Rob is saying. I think actually, though, that this policy will evolve as we sort of understand more about
Yeah.
green, our relationship to the green infrastructure. And so the Article 36 task force may very well help us with that and give us new, when they're done with their report in August, we might have some new work that we would like from them. So I think this is a good first step, but I'm totally here for what you're saying. And I think we will move in that direction, maybe more immediately than other communities.
And society may just move also, that we may be swept along a little bit.
They'll move a little quicker if they see that their potential customers are
Interested.
measuring
Yes.
that or interested in that.
Yeah, that's true.
Go ahead, Claudette.
Can I make a motion to accept the first reading of the purchasing policy as revised and included in the select board meeting packet?
I second it.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay,
So I will reverse that question and just say I move to.
Yeah, yes.
And I seconded it.
All in favor? Raise your hand. Okay. And Rob, your points, I guess dissension is noted, but appreciated. And I hope you hear that we're appreciating the direction that you would want to see the policy go.
It's not a dissension. It's my wording was a little stronger,
Okay.
but it's present adequately at the moment.
And we voted, is that correct? Help me out.
Yeah.
We voted all in favor. Great.
Unanimous.
Okay. Thanks. Let's move on to the gift policy, and then I foresee needing to take our break and then move on to the policing conversation after that. So I'll just, if I see that, I'll signal for your approval to reorder the agenda. But next is the gift policy, is that right? Yes. So, okay, so I was the first on this and Claudette was the second, and in a late hour, I confessed to Claudette that I was, there were some structural questions that I was having difficulty working through, and I pushed them into a memo. Claudette, do you want to share do you want to sort of present any of the things that we were thinking about with that?
Yeah.
I can put it on the screen.
So one of it's the part of the problem is that the state of Vermont has very poor at the state level ethics policies. And so when I looked at the statutes, I could not find a thing on gifts. There was nothing on VLCT's website. The law did reference, or one of my readings did reference, that the schools have much more stringent gift policies than municipalities do. I sent out a query on MuniNet, which is from Marcia. If you don't know what MuniNet is, it's a listserv for municipal employees across the state, and received no responses. Did receive a response from VLCT on Monday, which is why it's not listed in your material, and did look at the SAU 70 gift policy, which covers the Norwood School District. So, but one of the problems that I found to be problematic, and I think, and I also searched the Secretary of State's office and read all kinds of stuff. The wording in our original policy that says gifts can be accepted if they're consistent with line items. I can't remember the other language, was really, to me, set us up for potential problems without an ethics policy. And so I just put something down so that we could have a broad discussion. And not that I even agree with what I wrote. So, but I just wanted to have something down on paper so that we could at least begin the discussion.
Yes.
And so I sent it on to Roger at kind of like the very last minute.
And I was the first on it, and so I'd put some of these questions, sort of, that Claudia just walked us through, in addition to her ideation. I think, there's all these terms, like we talked about, our policy talked about gifts that are consistent with budgeted items versus gifts that were not, and sort of two different sort of procedures for that. I think there's other things that we may define. What is a solicited gift versus an unsolicited gift, and the role of a department head in that procurement. But I think, like, what it really might come down to is this idea of restricted gifts and our relationship with accepting a gift that has possible restrictions, and having some guidance for what that might mean, and ultimately, wherever possible, that we want to accept unrestricted gifts or gifts that are assigned very broadly to a department, and then have some kind, and charge the town manager and the department heads with some kind of process that when they have someone who wants to make a gift, that they maybe give them a list of possibilities, or else sit down and have a discussion to make that sort of an unsolicited gift. So, or an unrestricted gift.
And one thing that VLCT did in their response, they did cite a reference, which in my original policy said there were no references. There is a statute that covers it. I just can't tell you what it is off the top of my head, but it explicitly states that it's the select board that accepts these gifts. And so one of the things that the SAU 70 gift policy has are some limits on what can be accepted without administration's approval. So if you substitute select board for administration, I mean, we could put those kind of guardrails up as well, instead of having every little gift. One thing I feel very strongly, that if in matters of public safety, so that because there could be the appearance of tit for tat, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, no donation should be provided to police. Police especially, and I wonder, and I have to, in my mind, start to think about fire as well. So.
Any board members have some comments on what Claudia and I have been sort of sharing in some of our hurdles? Go ahead, Mary, and then Marcia.
In the original policy, my general sense of it was that there's kind of an emphasis on looking the gift horse in the mouth. In other words, when you get a gift, first of all, we should scrutinize the horse, right? And second of all, we should not accept the horse if the horse is going to have some aspect of liability for the town. So I think when Claudette is saying, look, we may not want to have gifts to our police department, that would be improper. To put up those guardrails fits right under, I think, that broad umbrella of sort of thinking about which gifts are helpful and which come from with other costs. And my kind of first take on reading the policy when I first saw it is that, okay, we certainly would not want someone to donate a brown field to the town. Like up in Thetford, there's a former mill, which the mill owners, after the mill burned down, tried to donate the land to the town, but that would have been a brown field. So that would have, had extra costs. associated with it, there were environmental costs. And I think what Claudette is talking about is kind of social costs with the police department. Like, you know, I think I sort of share her queasiness on that one, but I think that broad intent is very useful to the policy. So I just wanted to say that. Also, I don't understand, Roger, when you say restricted gifts, if you're talking about a gift, for instance, like the Gerard Fund, where the gift was given with a certain intent and the money should be spent for that intent, or whether you're talking about restricted in that the select board is putting up the kind of guardrails that Claudette was talking about. I don't understand how you're defining that.
Sure, and I think a definition section of any policy, especially this policy, will be important. And so the Gerard Fund is probably a bequest, which we may decide to treat the same in our gift policy. But I think the terms unrestricted versus restricted is any gift or donation that comes with certain expectations on behalf of the donor. So whether
Okay. It's similar to the Gerard Fund. Was your intent in saying that?
Yes, that's one definition broadly of what restricted gifts is, and we might want to sort out.
And what would an unrestricted gift be?
So Mary, another example would be the Kids Bridge.
Okay,
That's money that's being donated specifically for the Kids Bridge, and when they put on the memo line for the Kids Bridge, it must be used for the Kids Bridge.
yes.
Whereas a general donation to the rec department.
Yeah, okay, I see the difference there. And also with the Kid Bridge, there's another aspect, which is the pass-through aspect, right? That sometimes the town is acting as a pass-through account for some of these things. So it's a line item and it's a gift, but it's also, you know, it's sort of separated somewhat from the budget, I would think, just in the way it's structured.
Some of it's just, I know with the Kids Bridge, I believe, Herb, that there was a separate line item specifically identified as Kids Bridge, just like the
Yes,
Ballard Trail
Yeah.
Bridge. Those donations, they were specifically,
Right.
there were accounting changes made.
yes. Am I wrong in thinking that most of the gifts would be restricted? In other words, someone, you know, just had a thought that something should be improved and they've got the money, for instance, the fields at Huntley, are most of these apt to be restricted gifts?
They don't have to be.
But aren't they? What we've noticed?
That's a policy question.
Most generally are that you get. You
Yeah,
don't- most people don't just hand you $50 and say, go spend it anywhere you want in
yeah,
town.
exactly.
Most will say for some form of a restricted purpose.
So, and if it's
Okay.
not restricted according to VLCT, it just is dumped in the general fund. To be
Okay.
used
just
in any way,
accounting- As an accounting principle, it just goes right into the account.
right,
into the-
right.
oh,
Yeah.
Okay,
So restricted is separate fund.
yeah, and accounted for,
Unrestricted just goes in the general fund.
Well,
right.
there's
Yeah.
there's restricted and unrestricted gifts, but then there's like reserve funds, which has also been
Right.
used in a discussion of this
Yeah.
policy too, which is maybe often the same as special purpose fund, but doesn't have a legislative a statutory definition like reserve. So
Reserve funds do have a statutory definition.
reserve funds do, yes.
Yes.
But go ahead, Marcia, you had your hand up.
I did do a search of the statutes and I found several statutes that deal with gifts. And one of them is particularly as to conservation commissions, 24 VSA 4505, 5 and 6. And those actually talk about things that, some of them are received by the trustee of public funds and they have to be carried in a conservation fund from year to year and expended only for purposes of that chapter. And some of them, receipt of gifts of land or other property for purposes of that chapter have to be by consent of the legislative body or by affirmative vote of the municipality. So I think if you'd like me, I can give you a list of all of those statutes that I found. And maybe the easiest thing that we could do is just look at this in a sort of broad brush approach and say we could specify simply real or personal property, real property being land, right? Personal property being houses, elephants, diamond rings, whatever, which encompasses any of that stuff has to go through the select board. But just because somebody gives you a diamond necklace, what are we going to do with it? Do we want it? If somebody says, I'm going to build a new Tracy Hall and it's going to be 3 times as big as Tracy Hall, and that's my gift to you, who's going to maintain that? The select board has to figure out how it's going to pay for that sort of thing.
There's absolutely no, just because something is gifted doesn't mean we have to accept it. That's
Exactly. We should
Exactly.
scrutinize it
But
really
if
closely.
you could send those statutes, because VLCT only listed one.
So I think we're going to take another stab at this. I don't think there's a motion for a first reading. I think this was just a discussion, but I think it was Marcia has already made an offer to for how to contribute for some of our thinking. So thank you. And then Mary has weighed in. So I think this has been helpful.
Sure.
So I think right now I actually would like to so let me first ask, is there an agreement by consensus to rearrange our agenda to move the amendment to revisions for fund balance policy to number 10? So after the discussion of the policing plan and after our break? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I needed to get some consensus before I can reorder the agenda. Okay, Cheryl, you have a question, go ahead, but then I wanna take our break and then move on to the policing conversation that seems like folks have been waiting for.
That's fine. Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. I just wanted to know if what you've learned during your discussion, which I was late to join, that you're going to weave in the trustees of public funds into this gift policy.
We have not learned that.
Let's tell you that now.
What I said was that the Conservation Commission statute talks about the trustee of public funds being involved.
Right. And there is a statute for the trustees that says real and personal estate held by a town in trust for any purpose, blah, 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 shall be under the charge and management of 3 trustees elected by the town when the town so votes. So I think it's helpful to keep that in mind. That's all I'm hoping you'll do.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Cheryl. Okay, so let's take so for folks who are just joining us, the board is going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to be discussing the agenda item relating to policing. So at 7:58, so at 8:08, we will be back, okay? With thanks for everyone's patience.
I think the heat's going to kick on again tonight.
Yes, it's been cold in the mornings. Oh, I left the recording on, so folks may or may not have heard bathroom noise next door, and apologies to apologies to CATV for editing that recording out, the break recording out. Okay, but it's 8:08, and so we are back. Okay, so now we're discussing, so the item on this agenda. Okay, so the discussion of policing plan and community discussions during first 6 months of internship is the agenda item. The action item originally read town manager and chair to offer presentation during meeting. At the start of our agenda, I said I would like that to instead actually be a discussion. So what I would like to do, I'm going to just summarize very briefly where we're at. Then I'm going to turn to Herb for an update where his work is. And then I'll take some public comments, and then I would like to proceed to a board discussion. Okay. So on the 28th, the board, at our 28th meeting, the board voted to affirm the town manager's recommendation that had a 1-year interim police chief for Sergeant Simon Nealing, and then a 6-month plan for the select board to determine for policing, a conversation on policing, community conversation on policing and discussion. We first had a motion, right, that was to proceed in the inverse. So it was the affirmation of the plan wasn't a unanimous vote. So we voted, we did the first motion to take the inverse direction failed. We then had another motion where we were to affirm it. We had 4-1 on that. Okay, so that was what the board had done. So I want to hear from Herb about a little bit about the update and his working with the union to establish Sergeant Nealing as the interim. And then I also want to hear any information he's thinking about for the possibility of a coverage of that 4th officer, because in the town of Norwich, as I'm sure many of you know, we have 4 full-time officers, inclusive of the chief. And in this situation, in the interim situation, we would effectively not have one of these officers. And so Herb will also speak to his plans for his preliminary thinking on that issue as well. So Herb, if it's okay, I would like to hear an update from you. You briefly addressed it in your town manager report about the conversations for the interim, and then your preliminary thinking of what might be possible for that 4th officer during this interim time.
Yep. So just fairly quickly, we're still moving forward in the same direction of elevating Sergeant Keeling, who's currently serving as officer in charge, to the interim police chief position. What we're just trying to do is finish up the details of, basically we have to do a side letter of agreement to the union contract in order to do that, because essentially the union will want to protect his position if he doesn't get the full-time position to be able to return to the sergeant position. So that's generally what we're working on. The union rep out of Boston, as well as our attorney, just haven't been able to get together as quickly as I wanted to, but we are meeting tomorrow, and hopefully we can finish up some of the details for that. But also moving on to sort of a secondary issue, because I know there are a lot of folks that are concerned about coverage in town, trying to figure out a way without initiating an unfair labor practice of trying to, for lack of a better term, find a interim officer for a short period of time to be able to to serve as a police officer, a certified police officer, obviously, so that we continue to have 4 officers on board. The reason why I want to approach the union to talk about this is that by elevating Simon Keeling to the interim position and reserving his position as a sergeant, there's technically no other position to fill in there without the essentially not the creation of a position, but in other words, I just want to be able to find somebody to do something. So the concern I have is if we have this particular position, something doesn't happen with Sergeant Keeling, I have to return him to his position, but we've got somebody on board that's working, say, on a contractual basis. I want to be able to protect both of those individuals. The union's going to want to protect the positions. And the reason why I'm trying to avoid an unfair labor practice is there's actually a eligible position, for lack of a better term. There's within the existing contract, there's what's called an investigative officer, which is another form of a sworn officer. With that in the contract, if I were to go out and find, so there's two things that pop in. If I try to create sort of a temporary position and I don't ask the union first if there are any existing officers on duty that want to fill that particular temporary basis, which obviously would be overtime and all that, that would be an unfair labor practice. So that it has to be offered to those to help fill the shifts. The other piece of it is that if I go and try to create a temporary position to again, just to fulfill the needs of having 4 sworn officers, the union might call for an unfair labor practice because there's an existing position that could be filled technically. So by even the nature of creating a temporary position, you're trying to avoid the contract with regard to the investigative officer. So what I'm just trying to do is proactively have a discussion with the union before we get too far down the pipe to see if we can at least agree to say, hey, all we're trying to do on an interim basis is do this and see what kind of response that they have. Because I do feel uncomfortable moving forward with just trying to ask you folks to say, hey, can we just spend some of the money in the budget for, you know, what we normally have for 4 positions? There's a little bit of a complexity as it pertains to the bargaining unit that I feel compelled to have to work out with them first. But that's what I'm working toward.
So the ideal situation, Herb, from what I understand, is that we would be able to have Sergeant Keeling, the current officer in charge, be in that interim position, as you say, for up to 1 year period. So we would have the chief. And then the idea too is to have conversations with the union to see if you would have you would be able to have a temporary officer for during that interim period as well, allowing some community conversations around policing to move forward, because this board has heard from the public many different perspectives, and there was we would like to make a plan to have these conversations.
There's a couple different alternatives that I can think about to get this accomplished, but each one involves some level of, discussion with the union and the palatability of it.
Okay.
But I will say, in doing that, the caution I throw to the wind is I'm not for not wanting to do it, but I am not nervous, but I'm skeptical that we could find such an individual. If we find someone, that's awesome. But you know, it's not for lack of trying is where I'm headed. Yeah.
Right. We would want to make that effort, and we know that. I'm sorry to be summarizing, but for the sake of folks who haven't participated in all of our conversations, who are here, and so. Because we know that there's a difficulty right now in having sworn officers fill these positions. We've seen that in neighboring communities as well as ours. Do board members have any questions for Herb about this? This is the first time this is sort of an addendum, right, to the recommendation from Herb. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, I'm just not clear why an interim temporary contract would somehow involve a different position, an investigative officer.
The position that's eligible in the contract per se that we've had in the past is the investigative officer. So it's at this standpoint, I'm thinking of that more as title than a body in a position. But the issue is, the part of the issue is you can't under, and I even think there's some Vermont law about it, at least labor relation law, that you can't, if you've got the possibility to have a position that could be covered by the union, you can't supplant it with contract help or temporary type of help or part-time help that you would normally put through the town from that standpoint. And since we have had that position in the past, I can't, it's my belief that I can't just go and ask you folks to say, I'm going to go try to find a temporary person that we can just put in the schedule for police officers without considering that, because I do believe that that would engender a unfair labor practice. The other piece of it is, it's one of the alternatives is that if I do raise Simon Keeling up, there is his sergeant position that is there. And one of the alternatives say, well, if we can arrange something with the board that says it's still protected, so if Sergeant Keeling doesn't get the permanent position, he goes back to the sergeant, and the person that's in that sort of temporary infill thing goes away in that particular instance. That's sort of the other alternative that looks at it. But again, because labor relation wise, I have to be considerate of the contract and the positions that are available and technically were available in the past.
Right. And so just to clarify, the union contract makes provisions for 5, but in part because of a 2007 vote and some of the future decisions informed by past boards, we have consistently budgeted, at least for the last decade, I would say, for 4. Okay. And the police chief is in Norwich, functions as one of these officers, which has been maybe some of the confusion about coverage versus
that person's exempt, Roger. So
yes, that person's exempt, but the money.
Right. Yeah. The chief is not covered by the union. So by taking somebody out of the union and elevating them, you're basically taking a union employee, putting them into a supervisory role, which is a not covered role. So the union wants to make sure that that person is protected because typically they're a union person. Yes, that creates an opening per se in the sergeant role, but that again, there's sort of like a reserve on that position. So again, as an alternative, we can find someone to temporarily fill, but that person is subject to the tenure or the advancement or not of Sergeant Keeling. That's one linkage of it. And the other is that because we had an investigative officer in the past, a different position in the union contract, and we try to do something, looking just putting Sergeant Keeling aside for a second, just if we try to create a position temporarily, the union is likely, in my opinion, to argue, well, there's no need for you to go out and have a temporary position because you've already got a position that was authorized in the past with regard to the investigative officer. They may say, you don't have to call it an investigative officer. Maybe you can call it a patrol officer, but it still is a position that if you're going to create something, it needs to come under the union's umbrella, not outside of the umbrella.
Okay, Marcia, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I'm hoping, Herb, that you can convey to them that we had an advisory vote on March 6th of 2007, where the town people preferred 4 officers. And that's what we have had. And I'm concerned that their, advisory opinions, advisory votes are not exactly something you can take to the bank, but there is a statute that says they are not subject to reconsideration or rescission. Now, it doesn't say anywhere that I can find that you have to hire in the statutes a person who is a forever police officer. So I would hope that you could talk to them about the need to have 4 officers, and in the interim, while we figure out the policing in general in Norwich that the public requires and has decided is best for us, that a temporary 1-year position is what we can offer at the moment.
I don't think they'll have any argument with that. They're more than happy to increase the number of positions in the police force. The issue is going to be the fact that the vote in the past was non-binding. The union contract is binding. So they will use their binding contract that was mutually bargained to say, you can't necessarily hire a temporary position without it coming under the auspices or the union contract. Because if you just, again, this is where the unfair labor practice comes in, that if you are trying to do something that's considered an end around the union contract and the bindingness of it by creating a position that even if it's temporary, when it could be under the union contract, the union is gonna try to get it in the union contract. So what I'm trying to do, and I hear you, is what I'm trying to do is be on the same side of the hallway with the union as we are with elevating Sergeant Keeling and just work out some issues. What I'm trying to do is be proactive and address the issue before there might even be a filing of an unfair labor practice, so that they again, being proactive, trying to be cooperative with them so that they understand that we're not trying to do an end around. All we're trying to do is get an appropriate level of coverage for the town of Norwich.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, Herb. And obviously, like it sounds like tomorrow you'll begin your conversation. And I think for members of the public who heard that, I think we're learning how much our union contracts and policing really are linked, right? I think that's maybe just important to know rhetorically. Thank you, Herb. Do board members have any other questions from Herb? Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, how did we handle part-time employees when Chief Frank was there?
Part-time employees are not covered employees. So we have a budget for part-time employees. Those individuals have to be sworn according to that meet the standards to be a regular full-time police officer in terms of qualifications. We presently have one part-time officer that is that's currently an officer in Thetford and a former police officer for Norwich. But we've lost another part-timer that when Jennifer was here, we only had him cover one shift like once every 2 weeks to make sure that we had some coverage. We've lost that person, but we still have the part-timer, and it's Mike Scruggs.
And we had an officer had left our department and joined Windsor, and Herb had made that hire since all these conversations. So any other board member questions? So I wanted to move on to sort of a discussion of how we would begin to frame sort of the policing plan. I want to have a discussion amongst board members, but I recognize that it's 8:26 and there may be members of the public who would like to make comments. And so I'll open it up, and then we'll do sort of our discussion, and I will open it up again. So if there are folks who would like to speak now, offer public comment, they may do so. Okay, go ahead, Stuart Richards. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Stu Richards, 82 Elm Street in Norwich. Herb, thanks for the explanation. I'm having a little trouble following it. I guess I have a kind of a simple question, and that is, given what I feel is the importance of having full coverage, how soon can we accomplish that? Either with part-timers or with full-timers, or any other way you can slice it or divide it or multiply it to get to having full coverage?
Mr.
So
Chair,
it's a timing question.
So go ahead, Herb, with recognition that you have to still have the most preliminary of conversations, but go ahead.
So, so that from my perspective, just in general, with the situation that we're in right now, in terms of the coverage for the days, even though we're at 3 officers instead of 4 officers, we have the same body coverage throughout the course of the day. The difference is being down is that when the chief is on duty, there's another officer that's typically on duty. So that's where the difference lies, is in the day shift, we don't have the 2 bodies on duty. But overall, we do have a person on duty at that point. So the overall body coverage throughout the day that we normally cover continues to be covered. And then for the hours that we don't have a physical body, those still remain on an on-call basis. I just want to make sure that people understand that's the general coverage that we have right now. That doesn't try to belittle the fact that we're 1 officer down. I'm not trying to do that, but I just want to make sure people know that the body coverage as we've had it remains more or less the same, to have somebody on duty at a period of time.
So my question, forgive me for pursuing this. My question is, how soon can we get full coverage back to where we were before Chief Frank left?
Yep. So what I'm trying to do is work with the union to see what alternatives we can come up with regard to an agreement with them. They may just say, yep, go ahead and try to find a full-time temporary person to fill. Don't worry about the union contract. Just do what you need to do, because we know. I mean, that would be the ideal, but I do feel compelled to have a discussion with him for fear that they might throw an unfair labor practice at me. If we can work something out quickly, it would be a function of advertising and word of mouth to see if we can find that. As I said earlier tonight, and I would try to do that as soon as possible, Stuart. The concern that I have is that I'm skeptical in thinking that there's a person out there that would be willing to do that, because of the scarcity of being able to hire an officer on a general basis. That, you know, there's a lot of stealing from one police department from another in hiring folks, because there's a national scarcity of police officers. The part of what we can do is that in this whole discussion, which I'm trying to do as well, is that if there are current officers that want to pull a different shift or what have you, where I would have to pay overtime, we would do that, trying to use the part-timer that we have as well, so that we get as much coverage as we can. But ideally, yes, I need another body in there to get the coverage that we have. That's what I want to do. That's what I need to explore with the union. But I would try, if I can get something satisfactory, at least out of tomorrow, or within, you know, I would hope by the end of the week, because I'm just initiating this discussion with the union tomorrow and our attorney involved, that we can keep that ball rolling and try to get something going. But I can't.
You can't offer a date.
I can't fully answer your question. I can only give you a half answer on that.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll take another public comment from Amy Stringer. Go ahead.
Yes, hello, it's Jan Lasper at 95 Upper Pasture. I'd like to back up here to the bigger picture. We have union issues, we have all these details. It seems to me the big picture, we had a very satisfactory police force with a chief that the town voted for as recently as the last town meeting. There was not a problem that I know of or that I heard about. And now we've created a whole lot of issues, a whole lot of conversation to fix something that wasn't broken. That's the perspective we're coming from. And I'd be curious to hear why we're making such a deal out of this when Norwich had a very good situation with its police force.
Okay, thank you for your comment. And as I'm taking public comment, but we'll be discussing. Go ahead, Robert Racusin.
We're not going to get an answer.
Or Sharon.
Yes, Sharon. Hi, Sharon Racusin, 76 McKenna Road. To answer Jan's question, Jennifer Frank resigned, and I and a group of other people thought it was a perfect opportunity to look and see and determine what the police are actually doing, because there isn't anybody in this room right now, in this Zoom room, who could actually really answer that. We've got 911 calls. We've got lots of traffic. We've got very little crime. And while someone has resigned, it's a good moment to assess what we're paying for. And so that is where this is coming from, as well as, we've got a budget. I'm pushing back right now, and I would like to say, Roger mentioned that the union and the police are linked, but in fact, the union has a lot of power. And they're actually dictating to the town how we should be policed. And I think it's time that we really think about the contract and understanding how much policing we need in this town. And this is the opportunity to do that. And I'm sorry that the union has this much power over us and over labor. The rest of the country has little power when it comes to exploitation of workers, but the police have the best union going. So that's my comment. And I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Robin Mosher.
Hi, Robin Mosher, 159 Hawk Pine Road. I think it was Marcia who just mentioned a while ago that in 2007, they passed the law that we have 4 officers. So I don't believe there's any random time we just decide we're not going to have 4 officers. I'm sure others have left in the past. So I think right now there may be issues with the union that we should go forward and restore our police force. They provide safety. They take care of crime. They take care of our physical problems, safety issues. They've been wonderful. They've been great. This is not the forum to discuss whether or not we have a police force or a full police force. We've always voted that. It's budgeted. So I support the other people here, and I support Herb's efforts to negotiate for that.
Thanks. Thank you. Just to be clear, the advisory vote in 2007 was to reduce the force from 5 to 4. Just no correction, just for information. But thank you so much for your comment.
But it's been 4 since then. That's a long
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Bob Stevens, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself, sir.
Bob Stevens, 643 Patrol Road. So it sounds like we had 4 officers, and then when Chief Frank stepped down, a small group of people decided this was a moment to revisit this. But the town needs to speak here. And the town is larger than a small group of people that's decided this is a moment to revisit policing, which is an enormous issue for everyone in this town. And I would guess that most people don't even know we're having this conversation tonight. So my question is, how do we get this in front of the town? I have my point of view, but I feel it's more important that the town decides this, not me or Sharon or anyone else. And I would bow to whatever the town wants. I would make my arguments, but it seems unimaginable to me that we wouldn't hear from the town, that the town wouldn't get to vote on something as critical as this. So I would want to know how soon the town can vote on this matter.
Okay, thanks for your public comment. I've taken note of your question for sure. Okay, thank you, Bob Stevens. I think Amy Stringer is now, I see the camera is pointed towards her, so she would like to make a public comment. Go ahead. You're on mute, sorry.
My question is, did the town do an exit interview with Chief Frank when she left? Because she was very popular. She did a really excellent job. And did she ever indicate that there was any kind of problem, that we were over-policed, that we were succumbing to union demands? You know, what was her opinion about how our police force?
Claudette Bershu has her hand up. I'm trying, do you have your hand up, Claudette?
I do. I just want to respond to that because I think it's,
Okay.
whether or not she had an exit interview, I do not know. I do know that in the middle of union negotiations, when the union proposed that there be tactical gear in each cruiser, Chief Frank at the time said that was not her request, that it came specifically from the union.
Okay. Thank you. But Amy, I
And
realize
whether or not she could, she didn't, she made a very strong point that it was not her request. She had nothing to do with the negotiations between the union and the police and the town.
Okay. Thank you, Claudette. Amy, I realized I may have interrupted your public comment with apologies. Did you want to finish up? Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, so we're over on this agenda item. I would, Stuart, I would like to move on if that's okay with you. There'll be an opportunity after our discussion for more public comment. So I think we're over time on this agenda item, and there's at least one very big agenda item that we do need to get to before a late hour. And so I would like to have even the most preliminary of conversations about how to move our community conversations on policing forward. So to do that, I would like to just begin with the discussion. And I think when we first made the motion to affirm this, this recommendation, I had asked, what have you been hearing and what have you been reading, right? So what have you been hearing? What are some of the concerns that have been brought forward around policing from our community? And what are the things that people have affirmed and would not want changed about policing in our community? And so I think the first step is to deciding what it is that we want to investigate, what it is that we want to understand, learn more about. Then we need to decide sort of the scope of that work, right? And then we need to calendar it out and then implement that work. We know that we have sort of 6 months, so I imagine our investigation would be inherently nominal, right? But yes, we should develop a plan together. So I've talked enough. What have people been hearing? What is it like? What is it that they want to take a look at for policing in Norwich over the next 6 months? Who would like to make an offering? Go ahead, Claudette.
I would like us to replicate the 2007 group.
Okay.
That actually had facilitated discussions with police officers in other towns, chiefs in other towns, and multiple public meetings, public forums.
Okay. Yes, and you have mentioned whatever we do for community conversation, you had mentioned a commitment to resource facilitation.
Correct.
Okay. Mary, did you have your hand up? You're on mute, Mary.
Yes, thank you. I do like Claudette's idea about the format. I would like there to be a query about equity, and also in thinking that our community went through a lot of effort to try to develop community policing. And I think that in a very broad sense, when we think about nationally what has been happening or has happened for hundreds of years in relation to the Black community and other communities that the equity issue is front and center, is in front of all of us. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to, for instance, I think we had a resident speak who I think even, you know, was mentioning being stopped quite a bit, but just wondering if there's just kind of a measurable fear that's ground level with a person of color that even before there's any interaction day to day with a police person, it just flavors everything that happens. So some kind of awareness of that in the discussion, some kind of way of getting at, well, what would community policing be like if it were truly equitable for all groups? What would that be? So I would like to see, you know, just have some speakers, if it's in the, perhaps in the format that Claudette mentioned, some people who could get that across. For instance, I work in a very small school, but we do have, you know, children of color. And I just know that there have been recent incidents with families of students that I've had. And it's just a very different kind of a setup where it's not that you think of the kindly policeman on your force. You may have very good reason to not trust the police, but I do want that part to be discussed somehow.
Okay.
Just in whatever, you know, format that we come up with. I do think that's a very huge part of this.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Just one more, you know, there's a lot of talk about unconscious bias. And I think if you, during these discussions, if we had everybody write, you know, their first thought, okay, so imagine back in the Prohibition era, and you had somebody mention, okay, this was a rum runner coming down from Canada. What would your mental image be? If you then had somebody say, okay, this is a fast forward to the 20th century, 21st century, and this was a someone who trafficked in human beings. What's your mental model? Immediately. Then someone driving up from New York, New Jersey, selling drugs. What's your mental model? I think that uncovers the unconscious bias that we all have and don't acknowledge.
Okay, thank you. Marsha or Rob, any thoughts?
I'll let Rob go first.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to remember back to 2007 in some of the public meetings. And in reviewing the documents that Charlotte Metcalf included in the packet, it brought back the memory that there was a lot of anger at the way the Norwich Police Department was sort of riding roughshod over everybody. And so the community policing concept was to try and ingrain the fact that you're working with the public, you're not the public's jailer or you know, not trying to push the public around to meet your sense of what's appropriate. That sort of prompted the reduction in force and activities towards community policing. And very shortly thereafter, the question of racial bias came to my mind too, that the citizens of Norwich had been complaining that the police department was riding roughshod. How much more extreme is it that just by virtue of the color of your skin, you're having problems all the time? Anyways, that's not here or there, but I do like the process that was used. It was pretty labor intensive. doing all the questioning and interviews with policemen, officers, and checking with other towns, and 2 or 3 questionnaires out to the public and so on. I'm not sure if our problem is so extreme here in Norwich that we want to expend quite that much effort. That's like a year's worth of effort, not 6 months. But we do have to look at that, and that public, I think a process similar to what we went through to come up with the town plan is a smart way to do it.
Okay, Marcia, and then I have some thoughts as well.
I guess for proceeding with a process, as you know, I think we should honor the advisory vote, which we asked for in 2007, and which we have been adhering to since then. Hire a person with the understanding that, you know, today I was investigating this advisory vote and whether that is binding or not, because the statutes would indicate it can't be rescinded. And to that end, I talked to a person at the Secretary of State's office, and he sort of summed up and said the general supervision of the town resides with the select board, and ultimately they would determine the size and the cost for the police. And the voters then determined via the vote on the budget whether they agree with the determination made by the select board. So I think in making that sausage for the determination for the select board, in addition to proceeding with hiring someone, we should start a study, but it has to be directed. And I think the 2007 one, I kind of had some problems with it because it seemed to be too focused on certain people, and it needed to be probably a bit broader, but also targeted and adjusted, I would say, for 2021 awareness. Now, having said that, I've looked at, you know, the literature, and people like Patrick Sharkey from Princeton, who's a sociologist, has written on problems with policing, and those are really about urban policing. And that's not our issue, right? But there are other sources that we should be looking at in terms of rural policing problems. And these days we know that all of that's bleeding together. So I think we have to be careful about how we put together this committee, but it has to be adjusted. And in the process, the third prong would be to immediately look at the capital budget for how we could take some policing out of the hands of police via technology, specifically things like the speed, whatever you call them, the mechanisms that give people tickets instead of having officers stopping cars, things like that. But I think it's very important that we don't tip the ship. We keep everything righted by hiring another officer. And then when we've worked through this sausage, through this committee process, we then decide what we think is appropriate, and that gets voted by people in terms of the budget.
Okay, so I'll share, and maybe this will model what I thought this conversation would be more about. And I'm happy to sort of take on to be personally vulnerable to sort of put this out there, right? Because I appreciated Bob Stevens' point that, you know, we should be looking at the mechanisms in which other people have participated, right? So if we look at something like that survey that the town manager put out, I think there was an expressed satisfaction with their police force overall, but there was a lot of curiosity about understanding sort of emerging behavioral health issues and how there may or may not be non-police response strategies to address them, right? The social service needs for all living and passing through Norwich were mentioned. I think to Mary's point about equity, Someone spoke about being misgendered repeatedly by a police officer who pulled them over. And I don't, even after their pronouns were defined, right? So I don't think that's necessarily an indictment about the officer, but I think that certainly reveals an opportunity to, provide some more possibly training. I think another aspect where training might be valuable is this town passed a fair and impartial policing policy. We know that through Rule 13 from the Vermont Criminal Justice Bureau or what have you, they have training in the state model policy, which doesn't meet certain provisions that our that our enhanced policy has, right? So understanding like police interactions with undocumented members of our community, I think, or their lack of interactions with undocumented members of our community as well. So I think also we need to understand how nearby municipalities create regional or multidisciplinary community teams to deal with crisis situations, and potentially adopt a regional model, right? That supports some training for dispatch to triage behavioral health and social service calls, or to develop to whatever is possible or help a regional network of clinical staff and medical first responders. I think, as Marcia alluded to, we don't necessarily have all of those, we don't have the scale to address all those vulnerabilities in our small police force, but we might want to look at opportunities to collaborate more meaningfully. So I also would like to take a look at so-called nuisance complaints. What are people calling the police for? Are people in our community calling for violations of a civil infraction? Do they hear noise in the morning because of construction and seek to engage punishment like on their neighbor, right? So I think we need some data-driven some answers to what these calls are about. And then similarly, as I heard someone mention, understanding how traffic is enforced and how animal control, which is absolutely insane that the bunny that was billed a few weeks back may have involved a sworn officer in their work, right? So I think like looking at traffic control, looking at animal control, and the work that they have on our officers, so officers may prioritize the things that we think they do or we want them to do, such as preventing crime, so that they're freed up. And then I also really want to take a look at the behavioral health and understanding that some of these issues don't necessarily need to be addressed with a different public safety lens, perhaps. So that is the extent of what I would like to look at. I think also like understanding policing not through anti-bias, but as a structural racist structure, right? I think it's really important for, if my child interacts with a police officer in this community, I might want to say to them like, this is an officer you may talk to, but you need to be aware the larger history of this structure. And you might not have the same relationship with an officer in a so-called urban location as Marcia said, right? So I think that's also a part of it. So I think the things that we might want to investigate are not necessarily an indictment or looking to radically alter policing, but I think we need to inherently recognize certain things about policing and then work to define some changes, because I think our community had some curiosities in what they had put forward, and we need to honor how to reimagine some of that public safety. So I'm going to stop talking. Mary is now shaking her head and is upset with that, but I think we need to talk about a little more lesson process and a little bit more about the specific issues that it is we would like to investigate. Go ahead, Claudette.
I think an analysis of the calls are also important. How many, I don't know if there are redundancies. I don't know, some are vague. Community assistance, what does that mean? And what are the calls that are coming in under that? Are there double counts if it's a domestic disturbance with an assault? So is it counted as a domestic, both as a domestic disturbance and as an assault? Or is it really just one call? And which one is it? Yeah, no, I think some of that data, some of the 911, how much of it is hang up, or they actually list the hangups, but how much of it are really non-911 calls that are, someone calls 911 because they don't know who else to call.
Right.
You know, so analyzing the call data, I think, is also very important.
Thank you, Claudette. Any other board members? I see there are some members of the public. The only thing I would add to my speech, with apologies, is that we passed a policy unanimously that compelled the department to post their key department directives on the website, and that has not been done. So I would like to see that happen as well. Okay. That was unanimous, and that was with Jennifer Frank's support in the end, not at the beginning. Okay, any other board member comments? Rob, you have your hand up, and then I see a member of the public.
No.
Okay, Robin Mosher, go ahead.
I just had a really small comment. Roger, I thought your list was like really extensive and good, and I hope you write all those things down and everything everyone else said. I thought they're all great ideas. I have 2 adult children who are really concerned about all this, and I am too. And my only comment is, I know we have so little diversity up here, but could we try to get someone of color or several people of color to be on that committee and make sure we have 1 or 2 people from LGBTQ community, so that we really get the views of people who would experience bias from the police more often than maybe those of us who are white, you know, because I've made the comment to my kids, like, I've never had a bad experience with Norwich police. They're wonderful. We've been here 10 years and we lived in Thetford and we knew them then. And my kids are like, well, you're not Black. It's going to be a different situation for a Black person, which may be true. Not speaking of Norwich police, but just, you know, anyone. So how can we try to get diversity on the committee, I guess.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other public comment? Go ahead, Bob Stevens. You're on mute, sir.
You can call me Bob. So when are we going to know what the next steps are, and how is that going to be communicated to the public? Can anyone answer that?
Yes, so I can, so in our Trello board that you saw earlier, June 9th was sort of the date, and we will continue to work on, I think, everything between then. So,
well, you mentioned where was.
So June 9th was the date where we would hope to vote on a plan. That's what.
Where is that?
So earlier we had gone through some of our items for discussion, our calendar, for if you will, and
right.
It's June 9th.
So what happens,
I don't know.
What happens on June 9th? I'm kind of lost.
We would have a plan. We would have a plan for our discussions. But go ahead, Marcia. You had your would you like to respond?
One other thing. How will that be communicated to the Norwich public?
I think that's part of the plan that we would have to put together, but Marcia might want to respond to your question. Okay. Go ahead, Marcia.
I just wanted to clarify for him. He may not know that we're using this thing called Trello, and that it can be found on the website for the town. Just kind of Google Trello Norwich, I think, and you can get to it, and it shows what we're going to be talking about and when.
How do you spell that?
Trello.
And does the rest of the community know that? Because that's news to me. So how would the community find this?
We were supposed to put it up on the website so they could see.
So Marcia is talking about something that I and the town manager use to schedule our agenda items. It's available under the select board page under the items, but under select board page on the town of Norwich's website. However, your question about how will the community be aware of these discussions, what is the formalized process that you adopt for your community conversations? That has not been answered yet, but thank you for your question. Go ahead, Claudette.
And I just want to point out that it's been an ongoing issue in this town for many, many years on how to get information out to as many people as possible in as many modes as possible. There are seniors in town who don't use computers. There are people who ignore who don't look at the listserv because they just don't like it. Yeah, we can put a sandwich board out front, but that's not going to hit very many people either. So there will be, I can assure you, multimodal means of getting the information out to the public so that they are aware of what our plan is.
So I think, so go ahead.
I commit to that.
Yeah. So go ahead, Marcia, and then I would like to sort of summarize where I am and and then after that, go ahead, Marcia.
For Bob's information, I just looked, and under the select board listing, the first green link is the Trello link.
Okay. So I can continue to take public comments, but I really, it's 9 o'clock, right? And so I really, I think the board needs to, what the board needs to do now is we need to decide the content of what it is that we would like to discuss. So that way we begin to have a process. So we need to, whether it's convening members of the public with expertise in certain areas, or if it's to sort of take on certain questions that may or may not be informed by some committee assistance. I think it really makes sense, and Herb has also recommended this to me, that we really begin to decide what it is that we have heard from our community that merits further investigation. I've put my ideas out there. I heard Mary talk about equity, and I heard Claudette say she's committed to community conversation and facilitation and 911 calls. And we can proceed with that. We could sort of proceed with that for the moment, with the knowledge that by June 9th, we need to sort of have something because our 6-month clock is ticking. Go ahead, Mary. You're on mute.
Just to add the diversity piece into the conversation.
Okay.
Equity, but also diversity
Okay.
in the community conversation.
Okay.
I personally think panels would be good, but we'll talk more.
Go ahead, Claudette.
So, Roger, would it be your suggestion that each board member write up a memo on what they want to see?
I think that
I
think that's what we need to do for our next step, because I think I think that we need to begin with the content of what it is that we would like to investigate, and then we need to decide on that scope, right? And the process for that. So and I think it's informed by some of the tools that have been some of the past history, right? We have that 54-page report. We have the survey. We've heard lots of comments from the public. And so that can inform our thinking, but we need to, that's the first step.
What meeting?
For our next meeting.
Okay, yep.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So I'm going to take 2 more public comments, and then I'll move on, because I think we've had some discussion on this. Go ahead, Charlotte Metcalf.
Okay. I just know that this whole conversation has become richer as people have become informed about what's going on. So I second Bob Stevens' question. Until we had discussions about further development for affordable housing in Norwich, I never looked at the minutes of town meetings. I never looked at the packet. And now I do on a more regular basis. And Claudette can reassure us that there will be many people who will be afforded the opportunity to know what's going on. But I think the reason this conversation has become richer is that gradually people have posted to the listserv and have become engaged in this discussion. Because I don't think it all came about because of the survey that was put out by the town about police. Because I think, now I'm just maybe imagining this, I think many of us were very happy, we're satisfied with the less than 5 officers, but still 4 officers. 5 officers would have given us full coverage. And some of us definitely needed it. Maybe not, in town where, the police presence is definitely felt more than it is in the outlying areas. But we all have different reasons for needing the police. And I think somehow we have to make people aware of this conversation. And whether it's a vote, whatever, something that can make it come to the front for every single person in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart Richards, I'll take your public comment, then I'll offer one more invitation, and then we'll move on with board members contributing their ideas for a memo for our discussion at our next meeting. Stuart Richards, go ahead.
Stu Richards, 82 Elm Street. So I just like to direct everybody's attention to Roman numeral 2, page 22, in the town report with the police department statistics. I know that you're all aware of this, but I think it bears a closer look. It's not only the idea of examining 9/11 hangups. I mean, when you talk about the number of accidents, the citizen assistance, 99 of them, citizen disputes, 11 of them. And I'm not going to read through all of them because I don't want to take up more of your time. But it's important to realize that we've had, I think, just great policing for the last 14 years with Doug Robinson and Jennifer Frank. And I'd like to replicate that and keep that sort of thing going and not diminish it in any way. That doesn't mean that I don't see the need for equity to be included or the need for other things to be examined. But that should not be a reason to diminish what we've had for the last 14 years. And I've lived here for, I don't know, 38 years or whatever it is. And I've seen some policing that I've not been very happy with. So, trying to keep going in the direction using community policing and being aware of the quality of the service that we've had, I think is really, really important, and it ought to be front and center. And I think we can do that by emphasizing community relations, by beefing it up to the extent that it needs to be beefed up, by your accepting the contributions that were made by several individuals, and trying to, again, not diminish what we've had for the last 14 years. So thanks for hearing me out.
Thanks. And then I see one more public comment. Zay, go ahead.
Hi, I live at 1645 Beaver Meadow. So just to add a little more richness to the conversation, I would like to respond to some concerns raised in tonight's select board packet around the nature of our police department. So community policing promotes the misleading idea that police are not harmful if they can.
All right, Roger, I hate to interrupt, but Zay, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Let me know if you cannot hear me again.
Thanks.
Let's see. So community policing promotes the misleading idea that police are not harmful if they can build personal relationships with community members and rebrand as a trusted community partner. Community policing was originally conceived in response to a crisis of legitimacy like the current one, and it focuses on controlling communities by improving officers' reputations and communities' perception of police without having any impact on crime rates or public safety or doing anything to mitigate the actual harm officers do in a community. The quote unquote problem solving aspect of community policing leads to a concentration of social service functions added to police duties, functions that would be better served by community organizations that are not armed and do not have the repressive social control mission of the police. Community policing does not prevent racist police violence. It enables it by recruiting community members to participate and to defend the police based on their own personal relationships with individual cops and solidifying their surveillance and control over people's everyday lives. These personal interactions divert attention from a systemic understanding of the role of the police. From the letters to the select board included in tonight's packet, it's clear how community policing has been successful in this town, really successful. People seem more concerned with personal opinions about individual officers' characters and the overall perception of police than the realities of policing, what actual harm and violence are happening in our community, what the police are actually doing about them, and what solutions we can come up with as a community to really address those things and to build real community safety for everyone here. We don't need community policing, which is, as I've said, a specific and harmful police strategy that provides only the illusion of safety for some and results in actual intimidation, harassment, and the continuation of police violence and the violent status quo for others. What we need is our community members themselves, and when we have our community, we can create real safety. The point of this extended time, this 6-month period, and of a comprehensive community safety review is to bring this to the whole town. There are viable, existing, and potential alternatives to policing for every area in which police currently engage, and possibilities for addressing violence in areas in which the police don't engage. I'm really looking forward to exploring these resources and alternatives and implementing those things in the interim period. Thank you to the board for all their hard work, and I look forward to hearing the next steps in this process.
Thanks so much. Go ahead, Marcia, and then we'll move on.
I'd just like to request that we solicit if Zay has some factual evidence of abuses or problems that have happened here in Norwich. I think we need to know about that. If she's talking about things in general in the United States, I think that's a different issue. It has to be considered as part of the, bringing in the 21st century. But I would like to know if we have allegations of abuses or problems against this police department.
Okay. Thank you, Marcia. Okay. I would like to move on to ready for it, the amendments and revisions to the fund balance reserve policy. So now for something completely different in municipal government. But thank you to everyone for your comments. I think the richness of the conversation, we've heard that word, and I think it's I think the robust richness, I think will incorporate thank you as long and short of it, and the board will come back to this discussion next week. Okay, so Claudette and Marcia, what can you tell us about the fund balance reserve policy amendments?
Claudette, do you want to start?
Yeah, actually, can you pull it up, Roger?
Sure.
So Marcia, just to start with, Marcia and I had a few email conversations about the existing fund balance reserve or undesignated fund policy, whichever it was. And after all was said and done, I kind of decided I'm just tossing out the old one and starting anew with VLCT's model policy. Now, I don't remember, and I know Marcia and Rob were not on the board, but when we initially revised these policies in 2019, I believe, in the summer of 2019, we started working on them. VLCT was in the midst of revising their own model policies. We did not have the benefit of those revised model policies when we revised the old VLCT model policies. So I started from scratch and I just essentially pulled the model policy for the fund balance reserve. And listening to some of Marcia's earlier comments about needing to separate the fund balance reserve from the general fund became very clear to me that we needed to have the reserve, the fund balance reserve in a separate operational or in a separate budget, not part of the general fund. I also really started thinking about her query or question about and asking us why we did not have a highway or a highway fund. And I'm moving along to think that we probably maybe really should consider having a highway fund because we get revenues from the state that are supposed to be used specifically for highway. Like I think it's the Vermont gas tax line item in the revenue lines. I'm not sure that we can specifically state that those funds, because they're dumped in the general fund, have been held aside specifically for highway. And so that concerns me. And it also, in a way, just kind of makes me think that it might be cleaner to have the reserve fund as well as the highway fund, since those are our really two, the DPW or the highway fund is really one of the biggest drivers of our budget outside of salaries and wages and benefits. To have it outside of the general fund, even though I know that there are some specific designated funds in the DPW budget. So that kind of starting from very scratch and specifying in this policy that the reserve fund will be a separate fund, not wrapped into the general fund. And then Marcia, I think you can probably, am I missing something? I'm sure I am.
No, I don't think you did. The only thing is when we passed it to Herb, he crossed out a lot of things. And I'm confused. I think, did he cross out the highway fund under procedures? And in the paragraph beginning annually, the select board will propose fund balance reserve funding. That was changed to a percentage, and then I think he took out the fund, what happens when the reserve fund balance drops below 75%. So I think you'd put those in, Claudette, based on the model plan.
Yeah.
So
everything is pretty much right out of the model policy.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, Herb, can you say why you thought we should get rid of the highway fund and drop the structure for replacing the reserve fund balance?
Mr. Chair, do you want me to? So
I do. I mean, I think so. Next week, I thought we would. This sort of highway fund question and sort of our relation, our designated funds and this relationship to statute and the highway fund, I think may very well be a broadened conversation. I'm happy to have it now in this policy discussion, or else have it as slated next week. I think that is my struggle. So I think what I would maybe like to have Herb say for us now a little bit is why do we have why would a town have a highway fund? Claudette mentioned for the first time, the first information that I'm hearing, that we might be eligible for certain grant.
We get that money.
We get that money.
We get that money is,
We
and
have the-
the only reason that I picked up on it is Marcia referenced a certain statute about the state highway revenue. And then I went back and couldn't figure out, well, okay, if we're getting this revenue from the state that's supposed to be specific to highway, but it's being dumped in the general fund, how are we able to prove that it's been used only for highway funds?
So I'm going to have Herb answer that question, and then the broad question: why would a town have a highway fund? Is it required under statute or not? And then I would like to take questions, and then I would like to actually maybe move on, because I think we're going to have a bigger conversation about this next week, and then we could talk about the policy then.
You mean in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
So the reason for crossing it out wasn't to be against it. It's that you're adopting a policy for now. You don't have a transportation fund right now. So you can't adopt as part of your policy a transportation fund. That has no bearing on the discussion to have one. But again, what I'm trying to do is be specific to what your policy would be dealing with at this particular juncture. So currently your revenue under the state aid to highways, which you're right, is sort of listed as the gas tax money, Claudette, is $156,000 a year in revenue. And the overall highway budget alone is 1.5 to 1.6 million. So the money's, everybody's correct, it comes in commingled, but because we don't have the transportation fund, but basically speaking, the amount of revenue that we get compared to just the highway budget alone doesn't include the transfer station, doesn't include some of the other issues, the buildings and grounds, is that 1.5 to 1.6 million. So I think one could argue that the amount of revenue that's coming in is being used on highway related stuff. However, I agree with you when you have a transportation fund situation, you effectively have, when you create your budget process, you effectively create a tax rate that covers your highway funds separate from a tax that covers your general operations, select board budget type stuff. You would show as part of your money that you receive from the state, in this case, $156,000 as offsetting revenue to that highway, and the remaining balance is raised by the property tax. So that's an exercise in doing it. So in terms of the accountability, specifically of the revenue coming in and the expenditure going out, yes, you have a greater form of visibility to that, which I don't disagree with on. And then the transportation fund helps. We do it now, but it's easier to fill out. There's an annual form that gets filled out from that standpoint for showing what is transportation funding with regard to being able to apply for structures grant, paving grants, and some of the others. And then thirdly, I've already mentioned it, that if you have a transportation fund, the board alone can handle the surplus stuff versus if it's just sitting in the general fund, which it currently is, and there's a surplus, the voters are the only ones that can tell you what to do with the surplus.
And do towns have to have one, Herb, under
Sorry?
statute? Do towns have to have one under statute?
The towns don't have to have a transportation fund, but it's enabling legislation as it stands there. I'm not disagreeing with Claudette or Marcia at all, that if you want to move forward with that, it's just, all it is a exercise in additional administrative stuff, but and it gives you a little bit more power, so to speak, with regard to the transportation fund, but it does give you a little bit more accountability to highway related funds as it pertains to not only the tax rate, but the revenues that are coming in from the state. So I don't disagree with either Claudette or Marcia. But again, specific to the policy draft, you currently don't have one. So to me, it's not that it's not appropriate, but it's moot as to being able to put it in your current policy. I'm trying to remember what the other question was that Marcia had.
It was the very last paragraph.
About the, what happens when the reserve fund drops.
Oh, so the essentially you can't budget money to go into an undesignated fund balance. The undesignated fund balance is simply the difference between on June 30th, the net balance between the revenues that you have, the accrued revenues that you have versus the accrued expenditures. That's it. You can't raise as part of your budget process, oh, because we're down below 75%, we're going to raise X amount of money to get it back up to that 12 to 16% range for the emergency reserve, and just you raise the money through taxes and just let it sit in your account, or quote unquote try to transfer it in there. That's not the purpose of a undesignated fund balance. So when Marcia, you were talking about, I think it was Marcia, and I mentioned it last time, or maybe it was Claudette, sorry. I said the one thing that you could do to protect that money is to ask voters to create a specific designated fund that's your designated emergency reserve, and then you ask voters to transfer over a portion of your current undesignated fund to start that fund. And then it is separate and apart. And then what you do, and then you look at your policy of saying whether you want to be 12 to 16% of the previous year's operational budget, then you can budget something that gets to adding money through a budget process into that reserve.
So that doesn't make any sense to me, Herb. Roger, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we're under the 12% in our fund reserve,
yep,
and we have unexpended funds from a fiscal year, from say the current fiscal year, why cannot we ask the voters to take a segment of that undesignated or unspent operational money and ask them to place it in the reserve fund?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying that you do, that you move in that direction.
Right, and isn't that last sentence is saying that exact same thing, that exact thing?
No, because what you're doing here in your fund balance, this policy is continuing your existing situation where you use the undesignated fund balance as your emergency reserve. This is not moving forward with what I've recommended to you, that you ask voters to create that reserve fund.
No, it's that policy, the policy that is in draft form says it's separate, and it's a separate fund from the operational fund.
Okay. Well, you can't have this policy until you have the voter authorization to create that. So sorry. So yes, we're saying the same thing. Yep. So
yes, I understand that.
Okay. And, well, I want to make sure, because the current policy that you have is the use of the undesignated fund balance, and I've been trying to get you to move forward toward establishing this separate designated fund. So
and at the same time, in next March, we will ask them to okay, if the board agrees, yep, a transportation fund or a highway fund.
Yep, that's and that's fine. So so we're agreeing. So if you indeed have that reserve fund, then that last sentence or the last paragraph there is applicable. Yep. But again, if you were to adopt this policy tonight, you can't do anything with it.
So it sounds like the policy doesn't reflect the current facts on the ground.
It's a policy in anticipation of having a reserve fund, which I now get better with the
So
description. Yeah.
So I actually think that is reason to maybe table this discussion and continue the conversation about the highway fund at either next meeting or otherwise, but I want to hear what other people think on that. Go ahead, Mary.
I'm more interested in the change to ask the voters to create an emergency fund. I'm pretty skeptical of the highway fund change, but I'm willing to discuss either one, but I see them as separate issues.
Okay. I think we can't talk about a policy until we know what we want to write in that policy.
That's true.
Yeah, so one thing I wonder though, Herb, if you can answer, how is it that in our audit process, there is not a more stringent accounting of that revenue from the state that's supposed to be designated for highway, that we haven't been,
It wasn't flagged.
yeah. Because also this year, and maybe we will be this year, because we also got additional funds from the state specifically for highway.
Right, and I can't answer for this specific fiscal year yet with regard to an audit, because I've never seen government do something like that before, and Bonnie will do it appropriately, right? But I think the general perspective in this, and I will say this is more of a Bonnie question in terms of how she deals with it, but I think it really does factor in when you're looking at $156,000 for revenue, and you've got an overall budget of 1.5, 1.6 million, and that's what your actual expenditures are, that there is money that's being spent from the general fund that's on that, and part of those revenues, yes, though commingled with the general fund, go toward that. If you
I'm wondering, I don't think that the state treasurer or the auditor of accounts would agree with that position. So
well, I can tell you that every single bill that we go in there has a specific number on it, including for the highway division or highway department. And if we get $156,000 that has to specifically be used on highway stuff, I can pull out every single bill that comes to a total of 1.5 to 1.6 million, and I can say those funds were spent on that. The issue, but again, the transportation fund, if you want to create a transportation fund, you will have the better answer for that, specifically administratively and accounting wise. No doubt.
Okay, sorry, Roger, I kind of veered off topic.
No, I think I'm understanding the full scope of this conversation more, and I think that we need to discuss the highway fund and designated funds before we can discuss the policy decision about them. So let's agree to sort of, I guess, table it for now, if that's okay. Okay, but thank you to Marcia and Claudette for that work, and Herb for helping us navigate some of these thorny questions for sure. Okay, so next on the agenda is the equipment safety grant for the Norwich Fire Department. Herb, are you introducing this for us a little bit?
Yeah, Matt's here too, so he can fill in some of that, but just in general, I'll introduce it that we apply for this kind of funding, becomes available through our risk manager with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It's safety grant money that's distributed on a 50-50 basis, 50-50 being 50% grant, 50% local match. It's a pretty broad-based grant program that's specifically targeting safety equipment, safety issues, so that it minimizes our risk management with our insurance carrier, again, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Pretty religiously, the fire department will make requests. This comes through on an annual basis. This is the time of year when we need to submit this. They've changed the grant process a couple years ago so that there is not a specific deadline when these have to be in anymore. It used to be a twice a year type of thing. Now they just have a rolling application process. So there's no deadline that we're backed up against. As you can see in the packet, the fire department this year is the only department that is seeking funds. And I will then turn it over to Matt so he can specifically talk about what they're purchasing, but basically it's a continuation of their personal protective gear and other stuff that Matt will describe. Matt, if I may, Mr. Chair, sorry.
That's fine. Briefly, Matt, if you will, but thank you. I appreciate you staying to this late hour. I didn't realize that.
That's right. I was finding it all interesting. We'd like to buy 3 new sets of turnout gear for members. The NFPA recommends that you replace turnout gear every 10 years. The gear that we're replacing is 16 years old and really due for replacement. We apply for this VLCT passive grant every 12 months because we can, and we consider it low-hanging fruit as far as money that we can get that we put towards safety things that we would normally buy, and now we get them for less money for the town.
Okay. Is there a motion? Go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, go ahead.
I move to approve the expenditure of up to $3,999.50 from the Fire Department Equipment Designated Fund for the town's share under the terms of an anticipated VLCT passive grant for the cost for PPE jackets and pants, and to authorize the town manager to apply for said grant.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Any further discussion? Okay. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
All right. I don't have it in front of me, but I think that Alex was trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, which is that I think the total purchase in the memo that he put out, was it 3,000?
Yes, $3,000, almost $4,000, $3,999.50.
And that's half of the total amount.
Okay. All right. Sounds good then.
Do you think there was more? I can
Thank you.
look at them, although I'm sure Herb, did you just look at the memo or the, yeah.
Yep.
Invoice.
Okay, so okay, any
Yeah.
further discussion?
If you want to change your motion to say according, expenditure of up to, with regard to according to the application in the packet tonight, that would be an alternative way to do it. We would
Yeah, I think that would be good.
50% of that cost.
I want to be a little bit more specific on.
Okay. Or you could authorize me to apply for the grant according to how it's in the packet. And then when we come back, because it's out of designated funds, we could just do the approval of the designated funds at a future date.
Yeah, that would be great, because I know that the total cost is a bit more.
Wait, hold on. Hold the phone.
Yeah, hold on. I'm trying to pull up.
So
Yeah,
so,
if you hold on, I'm trying to.
so go ahead, Marcia. We have a motion on the table. We're in our discussion. Go ahead, Marcia.
Page 172, it says the total is $7,998.56, which
Yes.
and half of that would be $3,999.28.
Okay, so I have it out in front of me here. So to clarify, the VLCT passive grant will apply 50-50 up to and I'm reading directly from this. It will apply 50-50 up to $1,000 for the 3 jackets. And so the rest of the money would come from the equipment designated fund. So the rest of the purchase money would have to be okayed to come from the equipment designated fund, the total of which would be the $7,999 And then if we get the grant, it would be $1,000 less that would come from the designated fund.
Complicated.
Okay, that's not the motion we made. Go ahead, Marcia.
So do I understand then that what we're being asked to approve is $6,999.28?
Yes. What I'm looking at here is $7,999. $7,999, which, yeah.
So that's a big difference.
Yeah, that must be a new rule.
So if this is a rolling grant application, can we get clarification and come back next meeting?
Yeah, that would be a good idea because I think that must be a new rule.
So thank you for that suggestion, Claudette. And will someone who made the motion retract?
I retract my motion. Sorry, Matt.
I'll retract my second.
Great, thank you. So you can understand at the late hour and without the sort of differences in the answer for the motion, we would like to just come back to this, which we will. Okay, so I'm sorry, Matt, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the next item on the agenda is an executive session to discuss the town manager improvement plan. Given the late hour, I think we should have a conversation. We should have this agenda item and understand that we might have another one at our next meeting. Is there a motion?
Roger, before we do that, do you want to switch 12 and 13 and do 13 so that since there will be no action coming out of 12?
Is our board members interested in reordering the agenda a little bit for that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, so we'll switch to, by consensus, we'll switch to the other item, the formal written complaint that we have received. Herb, can you just paraphrase for the board what we plan on, what it is that they are looking to authorize for us to do?
Yeah, so at the it's separate, but as part of the lawsuit with Chris Katuki, he complained about one of your April meetings where you went into executive session. It was the one that we had the town attorney with us to talk about the particular case. He believes that it was you did not enter executive session appropriately. And that actually was the meeting that Marcia also spoke out against that. We have had, so what we need to do is that with Chris raising the issue, we have to respond within a statutory period of time, or that the town does. This was the first meeting that we could come to it, so we're beyond the time frame statutorily, but Chris Katuki allowed an extension so that we could do this. The attorney needs to prepare the response. He thinks it'll be pretty straightforward, but rather than trying to bring him into the meeting and have an overall discussion, and it's something that I can do with him, but I wanted to make sure that there was some board representation as that. So my suggestion was, why don't I just grab Roger, and he and I and John Klesch can just collaborate. We'll get John to file the response and then move on from there. So that was the idea for tonight. So it's partly to be agenda saving and partly that it's, according to our attorney, it's a straightforward response, but I wanted to make sure that there was some board representation as part of that discussion. Is that making sense?
That is. Can we have a motion and then we'll have further discussion?
I'll do it. Let's see. I move to authorize the select board chair to work with the town manager and town's attorney on a response to the complaint filed by Chris Katuki and to effect a cure as appropriate.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on this? It will be a pleasure, right? So all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So we will do that and report back. Okay, so now can there be a motion to enter executive session?
Oh, boy, let's see. I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA Section 313A, 3, to discuss the town manager performance improvement plan and to invite the town manager to join said executive session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mary and then Rob. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And so, is there a second motion?
I don't think there is.
No, okay. Sorry, apologies, everyone's nodding no. Okay, so I will record the camera with thanks. I'll pause the recording with thanks to Miranda, because I think we'll record the rest of the details so she can leave. And the board will we'll enter and then we'll send word to you, her. Okay, so I'm gonna do that now.
I move to enter public session.
I second.
Okay, at 10:26, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
I want to go huddle under a blanket.
Is that a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. With appreciation for everyone's time at 10:26. Thank you. Thank you very much. And
You.
all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Right.